After a long day at work, I received an urgent call from my mom, telling me to stay home because my grandmother was seriously ill. But when I got to the hospital, I found out she was fine, and my whole family had lied to keep me from joining the trip. I had just finished a long day at work, sitting in my apartment in Indianapolis, surrounded by the packed bags for our family cruise. The excitement of the trip, which had been planned for months, was palpable. It was to be the first real vacation we'd had as a family in years, something I'd been looking forward to deeply. Then my phone buzzed, and I saw my mom's name on the screen. Her voice, when she answered, was tight and filled with urgency. "Isabella, sweetie, I need to talk to you. It's your grandmother. She's not feeling well. I think you should stay home." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. My grandmother, Eleanor Green, had always been the constant in our family, the one I could always rely on. The idea that she was in the hospital, especially right when we were about to leave, was unimaginable. "Of course I'll stay, Mom. The cruise isn't important. Grandma needs me," I replied, my voice thick with concern. I immediately began to cancel the plans. Family came first, I told myself, even as a small voice in the back of my head whispered that something didn't feel right. I grabbed my keys and rushed to the hospital, but before I even got far, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Chloe, my younger sister. She had posted a picture on social media. Our entire family on the cruise ship, laughing, toasting, and celebrating. There they were, Mom, Dad, Chloe, aunts, uncles, all enjoying themselves. "Best vacation ever." The caption read, tagged with family time, and "feeling blessed." I pulled over, my hands shaking as I stared at the screen. My heart sank. They had lied to me. My parents and Chloe had used my love for Grandma to keep me away from the vacation. They had excluded me without a second thought. Tears blurred my vision, and the anger and hurt were overwhelming. I sat there in the car, unable to comprehend the depth of their betrayal. They had manipulated me, used my love for Grandma as a tool to hurt me. I had trusted them, and now I realized I had been nothing but a pawn in their game. The phone fell from my hands, and I sat there in the quiet, the weight of their lies crashing down on me. It wasn't just about missing a family vacation. It was about everything I thought I knew about my family. The truth hit me harder than I could have ever imagined. My heart was racing as I pulled into the parking lot of the hospital. I rushed inside, praying that I would find Grandma Eleanor resting, just as my mom had said. But as I approached the front desk, the receptionist gave me a strange look when I asked about her admission. There was no record of her being admitted, no trace of her in the system. I tried calling my mom again, but my calls went straight to voicemail. My stomach churned, panic setting in. Chloe had blocked me on social media, no explanation, just silence. The betrayal felt like a physical blow, one that knocked the breath right out of me. I couldn't stay here anymore. I couldn't keep running in circles trying to figure out why they had done this to me. I had to go to Grandma's house. The truth would be there. I sped down the road, tears blurring my vision, my mind a whirlwind of confusion. How could they lie to me like this? Why would they betray my trust so completely? I thought about all the years I had spent taking care of Grandma, helping her with groceries, bringing her to appointments, listening to her stories. And then there was Chloe, who barely gave her a second thought unless she needed something. Yet somehow, Chloe was always the one who was praised, the one who was treated like the golden child. When I arrived at Grandma's house, I barely knocked before the door swung open. Grandma stood there, a look of confusion on her face. "Isabella, what's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, clearly surprised by my distressed state. I broke down in her arms, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Grandma, they lied. They used you to keep me away. They told me you were sick. But you're fine. You're fine." Grandma pulled me in close, her familiar lavender perfume filling the air, grounding me in the comfort I had always known. She held me tightly, as though she could shield me from the pain. "I never asked them to lie to you," she said softly, her voice laced with sadness. "I told them I was fine, but your mother insisted I play along." The weight of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Everything I had ever believed about my family came crashing down. How could they manipulate me like this? How could they use the one person I cared about most as a pawn in their game? "I don't understand," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why would they do this to me?" Grandma's face hardened, her eyes narrowing with a disappointment I had never seen before. "Because they think you'll always be there," she said, her voice low. They take advantage of your kindness, Isabella. But you've got to see it for what it is now. This isn't just about a vacation. It's about how they've treated you all these years. As I sat with Grandma, the hurt I had been holding inside began to pour out, tears streaming down my face. I wanted to believe this was all a mistake. I wanted to think that there was some reason, some explanation for their actions. But deep down, I knew the truth. They had used me. They had used my love for Grandma to keep me away. And now they were continuing to take advantage of me. Just as I thought I might lose control, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from one of my cousins, a group chat with the entire family. She had sent the vacation photos, not realizing I wasn't supposed to see them. I scrolled through the images, each one slicing through my heart. There was Chloe, smiling in the sundress I had helped her pick out for the trip. There were my parents, lounging by the pool, cocktails in hand, living it up as though nothing had ever happened. But what caught my eye was my mother's diamond necklace. It was the same one Grandma had given her years ago, the one that was meant to be passed down to both of her daughters on their 30th birthdays. Didn't Mom already give it to Chloe? I asked Grandma, showing her the picture. My voice was shaky with disbelief, and the hurt seemed to flood back all at once. That necklace was meant to be shared, Grandma replied, her expression darkening. I gave it to your mother with specific instructions, but look how they've treated you. They've never valued you the way they should. The weight of those words settled heavily on my chest. I had always known my parents had their favorites, but to see the proof laid out so plainly, so coldly, was a blow I wasn't prepared for. I had spent years believing that if I was just there enough, if I worked hard enough, they would see me. But this was something else. This was deliberate. This was a betrayal of everything I had done for them, for the family. I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. This wasn't just about a necklace or a trip or the lies. They had used my love and trust for their own gain. And now I was forced to confront the truth. They had always taken me for granted. Grandma reached out and gently wiped the tears from my face. You don't need to explain yourself to anyone, Isabella. You've done nothing wrong. Her voice was steady, but there was a fierceness behind her words. Sometimes, people show you exactly who they are, even when they think they're hiding it. The room felt heavy with the weight of those words. My mind raced, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of clarity beginning to form. Maybe it was time I stopped being the one who always gave. Maybe it was time I started taking back what was mine. But there was more. The tension in the room thickened as Grandma's eyes narrowed, a sharp fury gleaming in her gaze. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself to speak the truth that I had been avoiding for far too long. Her voice, usually calm and loving, was now laced with a bitter resentment. The cruise tickets hadn't been paid for with your parents' money, she said, her words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. It was me. I gave them $15,000 months ago to plan a vacation for the entire family. But instead of using it for what it was meant for, they took your portion of the money, your share, and used it to upgrade their cabins and book extra excursions. I felt the floor beneath me begin to spin. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I was sure I might collapse. The depth of their deception was overwhelming. It wasn't just about the cruise or the vacation I had been excluded from. This was something much darker, something far more sinister. They had used me, manipulated me, for their own selfish gain. The cruise wasn't for a family vacation, Grandma continued, her voice thick with anger. It was for their selfish indulgence. You've been taken advantage of, Isabella. I couldn't stop the tears now. They flowed freely, unchecked. This wasn't just about the stolen money, or the lies they had told me. It was about all the years I had spent trying to please them, trying to prove that I was worthy of their love. The favoritism had been so subtle, so insidious, that I hadn't even realized how deeply it had hurt me. Chloe had always been the golden child, the one who got what she wanted, the one who never had to struggle. But I had been the invisible one, the one who worked hard for every scrap of attention, every moment of affection. The pain of that realization was like a knife twisting in my gut. They had used my love for Grandma to manipulate me, and now they were using the very money meant for me to further their own luxury and indulgence. I had given them everything, my time, my trust, my love, and they had taken it all for granted. Grandma wasn't done yet. Her eyes softened for a moment, the anger giving way to a deep sorrow. I've been watching them for years, Isabella. The way they've treated you. I've kept track of everything. All their little lies, all their misdeeds. She stood up and walked to her desk, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the room. I watched as she opened a drawer and pulled out a thick manila envelope. It seemed innocuous at first, but I knew better. This wasn't just any envelope. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The evidence I had been seeking, the truth that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. I was going to show you this later, Grandma said, her voice low and steady. But you need to know now. She placed the envelope on the table between us and slid it toward me. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. When I opened it, the weight of the documents inside was almost too much to bear. Bank statements, photos, emails, handwritten notes, all of it. A meticulous record of years of manipulation, of favoritism, of calculated deceit. Every time my parents had favored Chloe, every time they had spent money differently, it was all right there, laid out in black and white. The truth was undeniable. They had stolen from me not just financially, but emotionally as well. They had systematically given Chloe everything while I was left to pick up the scraps. Every small act of kindness, every favor I had done for them, had been met with indifference, while Chloe was showered with love and attention. The evidence was clear. They had never truly valued me the way they should have. "This is the truth, Isabella," Grandma said, her voice soft but resolute. "And you're going to need it." I stared at the papers in front of me, my heart pounding in my chest. The tears were no longer falling. The anger, the pain, everything that had been building up inside me for years, was finally starting to make sense. It wasn't just the betrayal of the cruise, or the money. It was the years of neglect, the constant favoritism, and the crushing realization that I had been nothing more than a pawn in their game. But now I had the truth, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it anymore. The next morning, as I sat down to process all that had happened, I suddenly felt a strange sense of clarity. Everything that had been overwhelming me, the pain, the anger, and the realization of being manipulated for so long, suddenly made sense. But now I could no longer allow them to control me. I had nothing left to lose. I realized that if I didn't stand up now, I would forever remain a pawn in their game. I couldn't hide the truth anymore, and I wasn't going to run from it. This betrayal had gone on long enough. I was tired of trying to please them, tired of being the one to bend and sacrifice while I was always the one who lost. I picked up my phone and decided to post the truth on social media, revealing everything about the cruise, the money, the years of gaslighting. The feeling when I hit post was liberating, a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. For a brief moment, I felt like a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But then, within minutes, my post exploded with reactions. Friends and family who had seen how I'd been treated over the years started reaching out, expressing shock and disbelief. Family members who had witnessed the unfairness began messaging me, asking why I was doing this. But I no longer cared. I had made my decision, and now it was time to face the consequences. Less than half an hour later, my phone buzzed again. It was my father calling, his voice filled with venom and fury. "Take down that post immediately, Isabella," he demanded, his voice cold and harsh. "You're embarrassing this family." My hands shook slightly, but I didn't feel afraid anymore. I wasn't that obedient daughter who always did what she was told. "No, Dad," I replied, my voice steady for the first time. "You embarrassed this family when you lied about Grandma being sick and used her money to exclude me." In that moment, I felt a strength rising within me. Each word I said felt like a declaration, a final stand against the years of manipulation. Every lie, every hurtful act came crashing down, and I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. "You're ruining everything," my father continued, his voice full of anger. "You don't know what you're doing." I could hear the frustration in his voice. But at that moment, I knew his words no longer held power over me. Everything he said now was just a desperate attempt to regain control, and I wasn't going to let that happen. "No, Dad. You're the one who ruined everything," I said, my voice strong. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just telling the truth." He cut me off, his tone turning darker and more threatening. "If you don't take that post down and apologize publicly, you'll regret it." Each word was like a punch, but I didn't feel fear anymore. "What do you want me to do, Dad?" I responded, finally standing up for myself. "I have nothing to apologize for. You and Mom owe me an apology, and you owe one to Grandma too." The call ended, but the echoes of it lingered in my mind. Yet, what I felt in that moment wasn't fear or regret. It was something strange, something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. I was no longer the person they could manipulate. I had chosen to stand up for myself, and no one could take that away from me. The confrontation with my parents intensified as days passed. They tried to twist everything around, spinning lies to protect themselves from the fallout. My father called several more times, leaving increasingly threatening messages. "You'll regret this, Isabella," he said in one of the voicemails. "You're destroying this family, and you don't even realize it." But the more they threatened me, the more I realized that their control over me had ended. Grandma's words echoed in my mind, steady and strong. "You've done nothing wrong. I wasn't the one who had hurt this family. They were the ones who had manipulated and taken advantage of me, of Grandma." I was standing up for myself. I was fighting for the truth. Still, the weight of the battle ahead loomed large. My parents didn't just lie to me about the cruise or use Grandma's money. They had been playing a much bigger game. As I gathered more information, the full extent of their deceit began to come into focus. It wasn't just the stolen funds from my trust fund. No, this ran deeper. They had been siphoning money from the family business for years, using their positions to line their pockets while I struggled to get by. My trust fund had been drained, and the company had been bled dry under their watch. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had stolen from everyone, including their own family. They had used their positions to manipulate and control everyone around them, and I had been the silent victim of it all. All these years, I had been blindly supporting them, believing that they had my best interests at heart. But now I knew the truth. They were nothing but self-serving, greedy manipulators who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Grandma had seen it coming. She had been watching them for years, carefully documenting every little detail. I had no idea how deep her knowledge of their financial misdeeds went, but now I understood. She had gathered all the ammunition I would need to expose them, and with the help of Uncle William, who had been a quiet but loyal ally throughout this ordeal, I was ready to take action. Grandma's foresight had given me a weapon. She had kept meticulous records, evidence of every misstep, every dishonest act my parents had committed. Bank statements, tax returns, emails, and handwritten notes all meticulously detailed the years of financial manipulation. Everything I needed to hold them accountable was right in front of me. "It's time, Isabella," Grandma said one afternoon as she handed me a thick folder containing all the documents. "You have everything you need. You've been strong enough to face the truth. Now, it's time to make sure they face the consequences." With Uncle William's support, we went to the family lawyer. He was hesitant at first, nervous about taking on such a powerful family, but once he saw the evidence, his demeanor shifted. He knew this was not just a family dispute, it was a matter of serious financial crimes. The manipulation, the theft, the deceit, they couldn't get away with it any longer. I wasn't just going to let them get away with everything they had done. "Are you ready for this?" Uncle William asked me as we sat in the lawyer's office, reviewing the documents one last time. I nodded, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on my chest. But beneath the weight, there was a deep sense of resolve. I wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. I was fighting for myself. I was reclaiming my dignity, my power, and my place in this world. No longer would I be the victim. It was time for them to face the truth and take responsibility for their actions. The lawyer promised us that he would move quickly. With the evidence in hand, the case was solid. We would go after the stolen funds, not just from my trust fund but from the family business as well. And we would make sure that my parents were held accountable for the damage they had done. As we left the office, the air around me felt different. Lighter, almost. The anger and betrayal hadn't disappeared, but there was a new sense of purpose. One that was bigger than any threat they could make. This was bigger than family. This was about righting the wrongs that had been done to me and to everyone who had been affected by their greed. I wasn't going to let them win. This fight for justice was mine to take, and I was going to fight with everything I had. The day we took action was the day everything changed. I had been waiting for this moment for what felt like a lifetime, but when the time actually came, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of something I had fought for, but at the same time, something that had been shattered beyond repair. My heart raced as I walked into the family business, the weight of the documents in my hands feeling like 1,000 pounds. This was it. The moment I would finally take control of my life, The moment I would finally stop being the victim. The papers Grandma had transferred to me, making me the majority shareholder, were the key. They were my weapon, and I was ready to use them. I had no idea how they would react. They had always been so confident, so sure that they controlled everything in their world. But now I held the power, and I wasn't going to back down. The tension in the air was palpable as I stepped into the building. The familiar hallways, once full of life and activity, now felt like a labyrinth. Every corner I turned, I could almost feel the weight of my decisions pressing in on me. I had been living in their shadow for so long, and now I was taking back what was rightfully mine. I found them in the parking lot, loading their things into the car. Their faces registered a mix of confusion and frustration when they saw me standing there, papers in hand. My mother's eyes narrowed, and my father's face twisted with anger. "What is this, Isabella?" my father snapped, stepping toward me, his voice sharp like a whip. I didn't flinch. I stood tall, holding the ownership papers out in front of me. "This company is mine now," I said calmly, my voice steady for the first time in my life. "And you're not taking another cent." There was a long, painful silence. For a moment, neither of them said anything. It was as if the words didn't quite register with them. They had always been in control. They had always gotten what they wanted. But now, everything had changed. I wasn't the same person who had been manipulated for years. I wasn't the same person who had quietly stood by, hoping that someday they would see her worth. My father sneered. "You think you can just take everything from us? You're nothing without us. You'll never win." His words hit me, but they didn't wound me like they once would have. This wasn't about proving myself to him anymore. This was about showing him that I wasn't afraid. This was about showing him that I had finally found my strength. And that strength was something he could never take away from me again. As the tension between us grew, I saw the flashing lights of police cars in the distance. The moment was upon us. The authorities were here, and my parents had no idea that they were about to be arrested for embezzlement. The documents I held in my hand, the evidence of their years of deceit and theft, would ensure that they could no longer escape justice. The police arrived just in time, stepping out of their cars with authority, their movements swift and deliberate. I could see the shock in my parents' eyes as they realized what was happening. It was too late for them to run, too late for them to hide. Everything they had done, all the years of manipulation, the financial crimes, they were finally catching up to them. "You're under arrest for embezzlement," one of the officers said to my father, his voice cold and unwavering. My father stood frozen, his face drained of color. For the first time in my life, I saw him afraid. He tried to protest, to argue, but the officer's grip on his arm was firm, and there was no room for negotiation. My mother was similarly caught off guard, her shock turning to panic as she was cuffed and led toward the police car. She shot me one last venomous glare, but there was no more power behind it. She was powerless now. As they were taken away, I stood there, watching the wreckage of my family unfold before me. It wasn't a victory, not the way I had imagined it. There was no sense of triumph in my chest, only emptiness. They had betrayed me, yes, but now they were paying the price for their actions. And while that should have felt like justice, it also felt like the end of something I had wanted for so long, but never truly understood. Chloe, my sister, was left standing there, watching everything unfold. She had been complicit, in her own way, but in the end, she was the one who would have to pick up the pieces of her own life. She had been part of this web of lies and deceit, but now she would have to face the consequences, just as they did. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I had taken my life back. I had stood up for myself, for the truth, and I was no longer afraid. Months had passed since the day my parents were arrested, and as I sat in Grandma's garden, sipping coffee in the early morning light, I realized just how much I had changed. The pain from the betrayal, the lies, and the manipulation had cut deep. But now, sitting here in the quiet garden with the soft hum of nature around me, I felt a calm that I had never known before. It was as if I had been reborn from the ashes of my past, stronger and more resolute than I had ever been. The events of the last few months had turned my life upside down, but they had also given me the clarity I needed. I had stood up for myself, faced the truth, and fought for justice. That fight had been hard, emotionally and physically draining, but it had been worth it. I no longer felt like the victim of my family's lies. I had taken back my life, and nothing would ever be the same again. Grandma sat beside me, her hands folded gently in her lap. The warmth of her presence was a constant comfort. She had been my anchor throughout this whole ordeal, offering wisdom, love, and support when I needed it the most. We didn't need to say much. Just being in each other's company was enough. "Your grandfather would be proud of you," Grandma said softly, her voice filled with warmth and affection. "He always said money reveals people's true character." I nodded, the words sinking deep into my heart. I could feel the weight of her words, and they echoed in my mind. I had seen firsthand how money could corrupt, how it had turned my parents into people I didn't recognize. But in that same light, it had revealed my true character, too. The strength I found within myself, the courage to fight for what was right, had come from a place of truth and love. I knew now who I was and what I stood for, and that was more valuable than any amount of money. As I sipped my coffee, the warm sunlight shining down on us, I realized how far I had come. I had started out as a person who had been manipulated and controlled, a person who had lived in the shadows of her family's expectations. But now I was standing tall in the light, free from their lies, free from their control. I had fought for my own happiness, and I was finally at peace with myself. The cruise that had been meant to tear me down, to isolate me and make me feel unworthy, had instead become the catalyst for my new beginning. It had been the wake-up call I needed, the moment I realized that I no longer had to live my life according to their rules. It had forced me to confront the truth, to break free from the chains they had bound me with for so long. Now, as I looked at the peaceful garden around me, I knew that the future was mine to shape. There would be challenges. Of course, life was never without them, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced my greatest fear, the loss of my family, the betrayal that had shattered me. But from that loss, I had gained something much greater. My independence, my strength, and my freedom. I felt a deep sense of gratitude for Grandma, who had been my rock through it all. Without her, I don't know where I would be today. She had shown me what true strength looked like. Not the kind that comes from power or money, but the kind that comes from within, from the heart. And as I looked at her, I realized just how much I had learned from her. She had taught me that family wasn't just about blood. It was about the love and support you gave to one another, the respect you earned, and the trust you built. I took another sip of my coffee and smiled, feeling the peace settle in my heart. My journey was far from over, but I knew that I was no longer the same person I had been. I had grown, I had healed, and I had found the courage to live life on my own terms. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, my voice filled with emotion. "For everything." Grandma smiled back at me, her eyes sparkling with pride. "You don't need to thank me, sweetheart. You've always had it in you." As I sat there, surrounded by the beauty of nature and the love of my family, I knew that this was just the beginning. A new chapter had begun, and I was ready to write it. My family banned me for refusing to be their personal bank. Now they're drowning without my help and desperate to crawl back. I never imagined that one day I'd be sitting here writing about how my own family disowned me over Christmas, or how I stumbled onto a secret so shocking it felt like something out of a bad crime show. But here we are. I suppose I should start by introducing myself. My name's Nathan, I'm 34. And I work as a mechanical engineer. Nothing glamorous, but it pays well and I live comfortably. I don't have a wife or kids, which, according to my family, makes me an ATM with no responsibilities. For years, I played the role of the reliable son, the helpful older brother, the one who could always be counted on to lend a hand, which in my family meant footing the bill for other people's poor choices. My sister, Sophia, 31, had been the golden child since we were kids. She never had to face consequences. Every time she screwed up, my parents found someone else to blame. The teacher had it out for her, the job was toxic, the landlord was unreasonable. Meanwhile, I worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and was mostly invisible unless they needed something. I always thought things would even out as we got older. I was wrong. A month before Christmas, I was sitting at my desk, completely absorbed in my work until my phone lit up with an incoming call. "Sophia." I hesitated for a moment before answering. It wasn't uncommon for her to call, but something about the frequency of her recent messages had made me uneasy. The moment I picked up, her voice was already bursting with enthusiasm, dripping with that artificial excitement she always used when she wanted something. "Hey, big brother. I've got an amazing opportunity for you." I leaned back in my chair, immediately wary. "What kind of opportunity?" "For the kids," she said quickly. as if that explanation alone should be enough to make me agree to whatever she was about to say. It's this incredible education investment program, like a once-in-a-lifetime deal. If we put money in now, it doubles by the time they're ready for college. I frowned, my brain struggling to process what she had just said. I asked carefully. Well, you mostly, she admitted, laughing like it was some kind of joke. But listen, Nathan, this is huge. It's an exclusive offer and we have to act fast. I need $115,000 from you. It'll secure both Tommy and Ellie's future. You do care about their future, right? For a second, I actually thought I had misheard her. $115,000? That was more than I had ever given her in a year. Hell, it was more than I had in liquid savings at that moment. My stomach twisted as a sinking feeling settled in my gut. I stayed silent, hoping she would realize how absurd her request was and backtrack, but she didn't. Instead, she pushed harder. Look, I know it sounds like a lot, but it's really not when you think about it, she continued, her voice taking on that persuasive lilt she always used when she was trying to manipulate someone. I mean, you have a great job, no kids, no mortgage. You've always been the one who had it together. This is just a way to help the family. You always help the family. There it was. The obligation card. The guilt trip. I swallowed down my irritation. Sophia, I can't just hand over that kind of money without knowing exactly what it's for. What's the name of this program? How does it work? Can you send me any paperwork? The shift in her tone was immediate. The sugary excitement bled out of her voice, replaced with something colder, sharper. Wow, so that's how it is, she snapped. I should have known you wouldn't help. You've been acting different lately, like you don't even care about us anymore. My grip on my phone tightened. What are you talking about? I just want details. That's a lot of money, Sophia. It's not something you just throw around without knowing where it's going. She scoffed. Oh, come on, Nathan. Do you really think I'd scam you? It's for the kids. Your niece and nephew. Or do they not matter to you? Frustration bubbled in my chest. That's not fair, and you know it. I've always been there for them. Then prove it, she shot back. Because right now, it just seems like you care more about hoarding your money than you do about family. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could get another word in, she hung up. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, my heart pounding from the sheer audacity of what had just happened. My mind raced through the years of financial help I had given her. Rent money when they were about to get evicted. Cash for groceries when she claimed they were struggling. Money for the kids' medical bills. Thousands and thousands of dollars over the years. And now, because I hesitated to blindly hand over an outrageous amount, I was suddenly the bad guy? Something about this didn't feel right. The amount she asked for was too large, too specific. Why hadn't she mentioned it to me before? And more importantly, why hadn't Ethan, her husband, said anything? He was usually the one who came to me when they needed help with serious expenses. I pulled up his number and shot him a text. Hey, just talked to Sophia. She mentioned something about an education investment program? Can you tell me more about it? I waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally, my phone vibrated. One new message. Yeah, man. All good. Just super busy with work. That was it. No mention of the program. No clarification. Just a brush off. I should have called him, should have pushed harder. But something in my gut told me not to press just yet. Something was off. I just didn't realize how off things really were until it was too late. Christmas morning had always been a mix of warmth and chaos in my family. The smell of cinnamon and pine needles, the hum of distant laughter. The occasional shriek of excitement from the kids, these were the things I had expected as I pulled up to my parents' house, the trunk of my car weighed down with carefully wrapped gifts. Despite everything that had happened in the past few weeks, I had convinced myself that it was still Christmas, that family meant something, that whatever tension had built up between me and Sophia would fade under the glow of twinkling lights and the laughter of children. I had been wrong. As I stepped onto the porch, arms full of gifts, a strange sense of unease settled in my gut. The house looked the same, wreath on the door, candles flickering in the windows, but there was something off. Something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the unnatural silence, the way the usual noise of Christmas morning felt muted, almost staged. Maybe it was instinct, a deep-rooted knowing that things were about to go terribly wrong. I knocked. The seconds stretched uncomfortably long before the door creaked open, revealing my father. One look at his face and I knew. It wasn't the usual expression of Christmas morning warmth. The quick, approving nod he always gave me when I walked in with arms full of presents. No, this was different. His face was tight, his mouth pressed into a firm line. His eyes holding something I had never seen before, a coldness. We don't want you here this year, he said. At first, my brain refused to process the words. I actually let out a small, awkward laugh, waiting for him to break into a smile, waiting for him to tell me it was just one of his awful dad jokes. But he didn't. His expression remained unreadable, unwavering. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. Then I saw her. Sophia, standing just behind him, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with something vicious, something triumphant. "This is no place for losers," she sneered. The words hit like a physical blow. It was like the air had been sucked out of my lungs, like the weight of every sacrifice, every dollar, every time I had stepped in to help, suddenly collapsed in on itself. I stood there, stunned, my grip tightening around the bags of gifts as a strange sense of detachment took over. Was this really happening? After everything I had done for her? I glanced past them, my eyes scanning the room beyond. My mother stood in the background, adjusting an ornament on the tree, deliberately avoiding my gaze. The same woman who had called me every time Sophia was in trouble, who had never hesitated to remind me that family takes care of each other, now couldn't even look at me. Ethan was there too. Slumped on the couch, his face drawn with exhaustion. He wasn't part of this decision, I could tell just by looking at him. His body language screamed discomfort, but he didn't say a word. He just sat there, eyes trained on nothing, hands clasped together between his knees. And the kids? Somewhere in the house I could hear them laughing, playing, blissfully unaware that their uncle had just been erased from Christmas. A lump formed in my throat as realization settled in. This wasn't just Sophia's doing. This was all of them. My father, the man who had raised me to be responsible, had turned his back on me. My mother, who had relied on me for years, was pretending I didn't exist. Ethan, trapped in the web of Sophia's manipulation, was too beaten down to step in. I had spent years being the dependable one, the one who fixed things, the one who sacrificed. And now, I was disposable. The shock began to fade, replaced by something colder, sharper. My hands trembled slightly as I took a deep breath, adjusting my grip on the gifts that suddenly felt like dead weight. I should have said something. I should have demanded an explanation, should have fought back, should have done something. But I didn't. I turned on my heel, walked back to my car, and placed the gifts carefully in the trunk. The irony wasn't lost on me. The gifts I had spent weeks picking out, wrapping, making sure everything was perfect, were now completely meaningless. I slid into the driver's seat and just sat there. My hands were still gripping the wheel, knuckles white. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. Anger burned in my chest, hot and suffocating. But beneath it was something heavier, something closer to grief. Then, like a slow-motion playback of a nightmare, the memories started flooding in. Every time I had bailed Sophia out. Every time I had given without hesitation. Every time I had picked up the pieces of her recklessness. And now, when I had dared to say no to an outrageous demand, I was suddenly worthless to them. They had chosen Sophia. They had always chosen Sophia. And no matter what I did, I would never be more than a resource to them. I exhaled sharply, forcing the storm of emotions into something manageable. Something controlled. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I reached for my keys, started the engine, and pulled away from the house that had once been home. From the people who had once been family. But I wasn't just sad. I was furious. I sat in my car for a long time after leaving my parents' house. The engine was off. The weight of what had just happened pressing down on me like an unbearable force. My hands still gripped the steering wheel, but I wasn't driving. I wasn't even thinking. I was just existing in that moment, soaking in the sheer magnitude of what had just been done to me. Then something shifted inside me. A slow, simmering anger replaced the hurt. A kind of anger that clarifies rather than consumes. The kind that makes everything around you sharper, clearer. I needed answers. I needed to know how this happened. How my own family, the people I had sacrificed for it, had so easily discarded me. And I needed to see, in cold, hard numbers, exactly how much of myself I had given to them over the years. When I got home, I went straight to my desk, flipped open my laptop, and pulled up my bank statements. Scrolling through those numbers, my stomach twisted. I knew I had helped them a lot. But seeing it all in one place? It was overwhelming. Rent payments when they were about to be evicted. Money for car repairs when Sophia claimed Ethan's truck broke down. Groceries when she swore they had no food left. School supplies when she said she couldn't afford what the kids needed. Medical bills, utility bills, Christmas presents. Cash, no questions asked. The numbers stacked up like a slow-building avalanche, each transaction a small piece of my willingness to help, a record of how I had been raised to believe that family takes care of each other. The final total was staggering. Over $40,000 in just 3 years. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. $40,000. That wasn't helping. That was sustaining them. I had, in a very real sense, become their financial backbone, all without realizing it. And yet they still had the audacity to call me a loser. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady myself. But my mind wouldn't stop spinning. And then, a memory surfaced. Something that didn't make sense. Ethan had once told me that he started college funds for the kids. He was so proud of it, saying how he put a little bit aside from every paycheck, determined to give them a future he never had. So why was Sophia suddenly demanding $115,000 from me for an education investment program? The pieces weren't adding up. I pulled up my texts, my fingers moving on autopilot, scrolling through old messages from Ethan. And there it was, a message from 2 years ago, clear as day. Just started 529 plans for the kids. Nothing big yet, but putting $100 from every paycheck. Feels good to do this for them. My stomach dropped. She knew. Sophia knew those funds existed. She knew Ethan was saving. So what the hell was that money really for? As I stared at my screen, my phone vibrated. A message from a number I didn't immediately recognize. You need to know what's really going on. Can we meet? The name at the bottom made my breath catch. Emma, Ethan's sister. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, but the urgency in that message was unmistakable. Whatever this was, it was bigger than I thought, and I was done being blind to it. Emma worked at a bank, and though she couldn't legally share much, she had seen something troubling, something that made her break every professional rule she had ever followed. First, it was just a gut feeling. She had noticed Sophia making large deposits into private accounts, often right after I transferred money for an emergency. These deposits weren't ordinary, they were always just under the reporting threshold, like she was deliberately trying to avoid setting off red flags. And these accounts? They weren't joint accounts with Ethan. That was the first red flag. The second was the way Sophia structured her withdrawals. Instead of using the money for what she claimed, rent, utilities, groceries, she would take out small amounts over time, siphoning cash into what looked like an entirely separate financial life. One that Ethan knew nothing about. The biggest shock was that Sophia had been lying to Ethan about me for years. I had assumed that Ethan at least knew I had been helping, that even if he wasn't involved in the conversations, he had some awareness of the financial lifeline I had provided to their family. But Emma had seen the proof. Sophia had told Ethan I stopped helping years ago, and that explained everything. That explained why Ethan was working himself to the bone, why he always looked exhausted, why he never seemed to question where their money was going. He genuinely believed they were barely scraping by. He believed he had to pull double shifts, skip meals, push his body to the limit because he thought they had nothing. All the while, Sophia had been stockpiling cash, building a hidden reserve that had nothing to do with the family she claimed to love so much. But even that wasn't the worst part. Emma had access to the bank's flag transactions, the ones that raised questions but weren't necessarily illegal. She pulled up Sophia's records and found something that sent a chill down her spine. Sophia had been researching international bank transfers. Not just random ones, specific countries with weak extradition laws. This wasn't just greed. This was an exit strategy. I felt my breath catch as I absorbed that revelation. This wasn't just about money. Sophia was planning to disappear, and she was using me to fund it. The thought made my stomach turn. How long had she been planning this? How many times had I handed over money believing I was helping my family while in reality I was financing her escape? Ethan's exhaustion wasn't just because of his job. It was because Sophia had manipulated him into a state of financial desperation while she secured her way out. She had weaponized his trust, drained his resources, and left him running in circles while she plotted a life that didn't include him. And the worst part? She hadn't planned to take the kids. Emma had found no accounts in their names, no evidence that she had set aside anything for their futures, only herself. She was going to walk away from all of it. I sat there, hands clenched into fists, feeling something cold settle deep in my bones. This was beyond betrayal. This was calculated destruction. Sophia hadn't just stolen money. She had stolen years of Ethan's life, stolen his choices, stolen every ounce of trust he had placed in her. And now it was time for her to face what she had done. Sophia showed up at my doorstep 3 days later. I had been expecting her. People like her always come when they realize their schemes are falling apart. Still, I wasn't prepared for how disheveled and furious she looked. Her hair was a tangled mess, her usual pristine appearance undone. Her eyes, wild with desperation, locked onto mine the second I opened the door. Without waiting for an invitation, she pushed past me, stepping into my living room like she still had some authority here. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she spat, her voice shaking, not just with anger, but with something else. Fear. I didn't react. I just stood there watching her unravel. "Do you think this is funny? Do you think you can just ruin my life and walk away like nothing happened? You have no idea what you've done." The sheer audacity of her words almost made me laugh. Ruin her life? She had lied, manipulated, and stolen from her own husband. She had turned our family against me. She had plotted to disappear while Ethan worked himself into the ground. And now she wanted me to feel guilty? I crossed my arms. Why were you hiding money, Sophia? For the first time, she hesitated. The rage in her eyes flickered, momentarily replaced by something else: calculation. She was scrambling, trying to find a way out. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Oh my God, are you really this paranoid? You're acting like some detective in a cheap thriller. Maybe I was saving for emergencies. Maybe I just wanted something of my own. Is that a crime? It was pathetic, really. How quickly she reverted to playing the victim. But I wasn't here to argue. I was here to end this. I pulled out my phone. Ethan's college funds. Her body went rigid. She had been ready for every other accusation. She had a lie prepared for every other question. But this was the one thing she hadn't expected. You knew Ethan had been saving for the kids. I continued, voice calm, even. Yet you still asked me for $115,000. Why? Where was that money really going, Sophia? She didn't answer. So I pressed play. Her own voice filled the room. The anger, the desperation, the sheer arrogance as she admitted to everything. The lies, the stolen money, the escape plan. I watched as her face drained of color. She stumbled back like she had been physically struck. And then she snapped. She lunged toward me, screaming, full of rage and panic. You had no right to record me. You're trying to destroy me. You think you're better than me? You've always thought that, haven't you? The way she unraveled was almost surreal. I had seen Sophia angry before, but this was different. This was a person who knew the walls were closing in. A person who had lost control for the first time in her life. Her breathing was ragged, her hands clenched into fists. She looked at me like I was the villain, like I was the one who had betrayed her. And then, in a voice full of pure, unfiltered bitterness, she spat out the words that sealed her fate. They're better off without me anyway. Everything went still. She realized, a second too late, what she had just said. But it was already done. I didn't react. I didn't need to. I simply tapped my screen and sent the recording to Ethan's lawyer. And just like that, Sophia lost everything. Ethan didn't hesitate. That night, while Sophia was still blissfully unaware, he packed up the kids and everything important. Clothes, school supplies, medical records, birth certificates, anything that mattered. He had planned this carefully. With the help of his lawyer and a few close friends, he ensured that when he walked out of that house, he wasn't coming back. By the time Sophia returned, the house was eerily silent. No toys scattered across the floor, no sound of laughter or little feet running through the halls. Just emptiness. She must have known something was off the second she stepped inside. Maybe it was the way the air felt different, like the life had been drained from the walls. Maybe it was the neatly stacked pile of unopened bills that had accumulated while she was busy plotting her escape. Or maybe it was just the sinking feeling in her gut, the realization that she had finally lost. Then came the panic. The sheer, unhinged panic of someone who never thought they'd face the consequences of their actions. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Her voice breaking as she screamed that her children had been kidnapped, that her husband had stolen them from her, that the police needed to find them now. But the officers weren't interested in her theatrics. When they arrived, they were already aware of the situation. Ethan had full legal custody granted before he even left, thanks to the overwhelming evidence of Sophia's financial fraud and deception. She had no ground to stand on, no claim, no authority. That realization must have hit her like a freight train. She tried to backpedal, tried to spin the story in her favor, but it was too late. The police handed her a copy of the custody agreement. A cold, legal confirmation that she had no rights to anything. And that was when the rage set in. She turned on me next. My phone started blowing up with messages, voicemails filled with pure venom. She blamed me for everything, said I had ruined her life, that I had plotted against her, set her up, manipulated Ethan. She called me a backstabber, a traitor, the reason she had nothing left. But the thing was, she had done this to herself. When my parents finally got involved, I thought, for a brief moment, that they would take her side, that they would try to guilt-trip me into fixing the mess she created. After all, they always had before. But even my mother, the woman who had spent decades defending her, couldn't deny the truth anymore. She had seen the evidence herself. The secret accounts, the money siphoned away, the records of her planning to disappear. There was nothing left to defend. That didn't stop Sophia from trying, though. Desperate and humiliated, she turned to the only other option she had left. The man she had planned to run away with. The same guy she had secretly been messaging, plotting a new life with, believing he would rescue her from the situation she had created. She must have thought he would open his arms, tell her everything would be fine, whisk her away like some tragic, misunderstood heroine. But the moment she lost access to the money, he was gone, blocked her on everything. She was alone. For the first time in her life, Sophia had no one left to manipulate, no one left to bail her out, and she had no one to blame but herself. Epilogue. Moving forward, Ethan and the kids are finally stepping into the kind of life they always deserved. No more living in the shadows of financial stress. No more feeling like they were walking on eggshells around a woman who only saw them as obstacles to her own selfish plans. Ethan found a job with better hours, better pay, and most importantly, more time to be a father. He's different now, lighter, freer, like a weight he didn't even realize he was carrying has finally been lifted. He spends weekends taking the kids to the park, helping them with their school projects, being present in a way that was impossible before. The kids are in therapy, and while they do miss their mother, it's not as much as you'd expect. Maybe it's because, deep down, even they sense the distance she always kept between them. Maybe they recognize that her love came with conditions, with expectations they could never meet. Or maybe it's just that, for the first time in their young lives, their home feels like a safe, stable place. As for my parents, well, they finally swallowed their pride long enough to apologize. I could tell it wasn't easy for them. Admitting they had been wrong after years of enabling Sophia's behavior must have been like pulling teeth. For a while, I almost let myself believe that this could be a fresh start, that maybe we could rebuild something from the wreckage Sophia left behind. Then they asked me for $20,000 to help her get back on her feet. I shouldn't have been surprised. Of course, they still saw me as the reliable one, the one who always had the means to fix things, to clean up after Sophia's messes. They still believed that family takes care of each other, even when certain members of that family had done nothing but take. I just laughed. A real, genuine laugh. Not bitter, not angry, just done. Then I told them, help her with your own money. They didn't like that answer. My father got defensive, talking about family loyalty and doing the right thing. My mother tried a different approach, her voice softer, saying, but she's still your sister. But you know what? That doesn't mean anything anymore. I haven't heard from them since. No phone calls, no guilt-tripping texts, no half-hearted attempts at reconciliation. And that's fine. I've spent too many years setting myself on fire to keep others warm. I'm done. And for the first time in my life, I feel absolutely no guilt about it. This story serves as a harsh but necessary reminder: kindness is not infinite, and family does not always mean love and unconditional support. Sometimes, the people we trust the most are the very ones who exploit our goodwill the worst. Ethan and his kids have finally found peace, but at the cost of a deep betrayal from the person who was supposed to love them the most. And as for me, I've learned that cutting off toxic relationships isn't a loss. It's a liberation. So, what do you think about this story? Have you ever been in a situation where your kindness was taken advantage of? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Because life always has lessons worth telling. I walked in on my brother and fiancé in her bed just 2 months before our wedding. She chose him, married him when she got pregnant, but now he's gone, and somehow, I'm the one expected to fix their mess. 3 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and at the time I was engaged to Madison Rivers, a woman I had spent nearly 5 years building a life with. We were both attorneys, ambitious and thriving in our careers, balancing our fast-paced lives with moments of genuine connection. Madison wasn't just my fiancée, she was my best friend, my future, my everything. Our relationship had always been built on mutual respect, trust, and shared aspirations. We had our routines: Saturday morning coffee at our favorite spot, spontaneous road trips when our schedules allowed, and nights spent discussing our cases, each of us challenging the other to think differently. Madison had this infectious energy, the kind that could light up a room, and for years, I believed that no matter how chaotic life became, we would always have each other to lean on. I had grown up in the shadow of my younger brother, Ryan Caldwell. While I was the responsible, career-driven older sibling, Ryan was the reckless free spirit who never took life too seriously. He was charming, unpredictable, and had a way of getting away with things most people wouldn't dare attempt. Despite our differences, I had always looked out for him. I covered for him when he skipped classes, bailed him out of trouble, and even helped him secure internships he didn't deserve. Looking back, maybe I had been enabling him all along. Even though Ryan and I were opposites, I never doubted that he cared about me in his own way. He had always been the life of the party, the one who could walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention. It wasn't that I resented him for it. I had my own successes, my own achievements. But there was always this unspoken expectation that I would be the one to clean up after him. to make sure he landed on his feet when he inevitably stumbled. It was a dynamic I had grown used to, something I had never questioned. Until later. Madison and I had planned our wedding for early spring. It was supposed to be the happiest time of our lives. We had already booked the venue, sent out invitations, and carefully chosen every detail. Madison had spent months deciding on the perfect dress, and I had watched her excitement build with each passing day. Every conversation we had about the wedding was filled with anticipation for the life we were about to begin together. I can still remember the way she looked at me during those moments. Full of love, full of certainty. It was the kind of look that made me believe without a doubt that we were meant to be. There were nights we would stay up late just imagining our future together, the house we would buy, the family we would build, the years of memories we would create side by side. I had never felt so sure about anything in my life. But certainty, as I would soon learn, is fragile. And just 2 months before the big day, my world came crashing down in ways I never could have imagined. Madison had always been ambitious, the kind of person who threw herself completely into her work, chasing success with a relentless determination. That's one of the things I admired most about her, her drive, her discipline, her unwillingness to settle for anything less than excellence. But that same intensity made her vulnerable to failure in a way she never quite learned to handle. When she lost her job, she tried to play it off as nothing more than a temporary setback. She didn't give me many details, just that it had been a misunderstanding and that her firm had overreacted. But I could see the cracks forming. The way she avoided eye contact when she told me. The way her hands fidgeted, restless, as if trying to grasp at something solid. Madison had always been composed, always in control. But in the days that followed, she seemed lost, unmoored. I did my best to reassure her, to remind her that we were a team, that we would get through this together. I told her she didn't need to rush into anything, that she could take the time she needed to figure things out. But she hated being idle. She needed something, anything, to occupy her mind, to fill the void that losing her job had left behind. That's when she found pottery. It was something she had always talked about trying but never had the time for. Now, with no job and plenty of free hours, she decided to enroll in a local class. First, I was happy for her. It seemed like a harmless hobby, something that might help her regain a sense of purpose. She would come home covered in clay, talking about different techniques, excited in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. It was a relief to see her smile again. But what I didn't know, what I never could have anticipated, was that Ryan was taking those same classes. I don't remember the exact moment I realized something felt off. Maybe it was when she started mentioning Ryan more often, slipping his name into casual conversation in a way she never had before. At first, I didn't think much of it. Ryan had always been the kind of guy who made people laugh, who could charm his way into any group. Maybe he was just keeping her company. Maybe he was helping her feel like herself again. But then it became more than that. Started small. Ryan offering to pick her up from class, dropping her off afterward. A text here, comment there. Then suddenly there were inside jokes I wasn't a part of, references I didn't understand. They were spending more and more time together. Not just in class, but outside of it. Trips to new restaurants, museum visits, weekend outings. Things that, once upon a time, had been ours. I told myself it was nothing. I wanted to believe that it was nothing. Madison had never given me a reason to doubt her before. And Ryan, despite all his flaws, was still my brother. But the unease settled in deep in my gut, a slow-growing rot that I couldn't ignore. I started noticing little things. The way Madison would put her phone face down whenever I walked into the room. The way she seemed more distant, more distracted. The way she started canceling plans with me, making excuses about being too tired, too busy, too overwhelmed. One evening, I finally worked up the courage to ask her about it. She laughed, shaking her head, telling me I was being paranoid. Ryan is like a little brother to me, she said. You're overthinking this. I wanted to believe her. So I did. Until the night I came home early. I was supposed to be out of town on a business trip, but a last-minute change brought me home a day early. The thought of surprising Madison had me smiling as I pulled into the driveway. But that smile faded the moment I saw Ryan's car parked outside. My stomach clenched. It was past 9 p.m. There was no reason for him to be there. The air felt heavy as I stepped out of the car. An unshakable tension pressing against my chest. The house was dark, save for the dim glow coming from the living room window. My hand hovered over the doorknob for a brief second before I turned it and stepped inside. The first thing I heard was laughter, hers and his, mingling together. Light and carefree in a way that sent a chill down my spine. It was a sound I used to love, but now in this moment it felt like a blade twisting between my ribs. The living room was a mess. Beer bottles scattered across the floor, the faint scent of alcohol and sweat lingering in the air. The television flickered, casting erratic shadows across the walls. A jacket Ryan's was draped over the back of the couch. It was all wrong. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I moved down the hallway, my steps slow, deliberate. The door to our bedroom was slightly ajar. A sliver of warm light spilled onto the carpet. I already knew what I was about to see, but I pushed the door open anyway. There they were, tangled in each other, completely unaware of my presence. The sheets I had slept in, the bed we had shared, it was now theirs. My breath hitched. My vision blurred at the edges. But I didn't look away. A part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers, but another part, the part that already knew there were no answers that would ever be enough, stayed silent. A cold, numbing clarity settled over me. I stepped forward, my body moving before my mind could catch up. Ryan's back was turned to me, but Madison's eyes shot open the second she sensed another presence in the room. The shift in her face, from pleasure to sheer terror, was almost satisfying. Almost. I grabbed Ryan by the collar, yanking him off the bed with a force I didn't even know I had. His body hit the floor hard, a startled yelp escaping his lips as he scrambled to make sense of what was happening. But I didn't give him a chance. My fist met his face with a sickening crunch, the impact sending a sharp pain up my knuckles, but I barely felt it. Ryan groaned, his hands weakly coming up in a pathetic attempt to shield himself. But I hit him again, and again. Madison was screaming now, her voice cracking as she pleaded with me to stop. I barely registered her words. My focus was on Ryan, on the betrayal that had been festering beneath my nose for God knows how long. I could feel my breath coming fast, ragged, my entire body shaking with an anger so raw, so visceral that it frightened even me. Blood dripped from Ryan's nose, staining his shirt in dark, ugly splotches. He wasn't fighting back. He never did. He had always been the type to manipulate his way out of consequences, to charm his way into forgiveness. But there was no charming his way out of this. I finally let go, shoving him backward. He hit the edge of the nightstand, knocking over a lamp that crashed to the floor. For a moment, the only sound in the room was our heavy breathing. Then I turned to Madison. She was clutching the sheets to her chest, her face streaked with tears, her lips trembling as she tried to form words. Words that didn't matter. "Get out," I said, my voice eerily calm. She shook her head, whispering something about how it was a mistake, a moment of weakness. How she never meant to hurt me. But all I could see was her tangled up in my brother. In the life I thought was ours. "You have 10 minutes, I said flatly. "If you're still here after that, I'll throw you out myself." She hesitated, her eyes searching mine for something, remorse, forgiveness, anything. But I had nothing left to give. I had spent years loving her, trusting her, building a life with her. And in return, she had burned it to the ground. I reached down, grabbed her hand and slid the engagement ring off her finger. She gasped as if the gesture hurt more than my words, as if she had expected me to fight for her, to beg her to stay. But I was done fighting. She gathered her things with trembling hands, stuffing clothes into a bag in hurried, desperate motions. She was crying, but I felt nothing. Not sadness, not rage, just emptiness. Ryan hadn't moved from where he had slumped against the nightstand. He was still breathing heavily, his face swollen, his expression unreadable. I could have hit him again. I could have broken him the way he had broken my trust. But instead, I turned and walked away. As the front door shut behind Madison for the last time, the silence that followed was deafening. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty hallway, the space where she had once been. I had always thought heartbreak would feel like pain, like agony. But in that moment, it felt like nothing at all. The days that followed were a haze of fury and disbelief. Sleep eluded me, my thoughts a tangled mess of betrayal and unanswered questions. My fists still ached from the impact of hitting Ryan, but the pain was a welcome distraction from the storm raging inside me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, Madison wrapped around him. The sheets we had once shared now tangled with someone else's deceit. My parents, predictably, tried to mediate as if this could be salvaged with apologies and empty words. My mother, ever the defender of Ryan, insisted that I talk it out with him as though this was some petty sibling argument over a borrowed jacket, not the complete and utter dismantling of my life. She didn't see it as betrayal, just a mistake. One that, in her mind, could be forgiven with time and understanding. My father was more restrained, but his silence spoke volumes. He saw the pain in my eyes, the devastation, yet he still hesitated to take a firm stance. Perhaps he thought that by staying neutral he was helping. But his neutrality felt like another betrayal. It confirmed what I had always known but never wanted to admit: Ryan would always be the golden child in their eyes. No matter what he did, no matter how deeply he cut those around him, he would always have their unconditional support. I stopped answering my mother's calls, stopped replying to texts. I couldn't stomach hearing her try to justify what had happened. Couldn't bear to listen to her attempt to smooth over the wreckage as if my life wasn't burning down around me. I was already drowning in my own fury. I didn't need her pouring more fuel onto the fire. Then, 2 weeks later, the final blow came. Madison was pregnant, and Ryan was the father. I found out through my mother, of course. She left a voicemail, her voice light, almost excited, as though this was some joyous family announcement instead of a twisted reminder of my own humiliation. She had the audacity to tell me that I should be happy for them, that sometimes things work out in unexpected ways. I nearly threw my phone against the wall. I could picture them together. Madison with that guilty, hopeful look in her eyes. Ryan with his signature smirk, convinced that everything would fall into place for him like it always did. Did he even feel remorse? Did he ever lose sleep over what he had done, or did he simply see it as another situation he had navigated his way out of? The thought of them playing house, of them starting a family built on lies and betrayal, made my stomach turn. They got married quietly. I wasn't invited. I wouldn't have gone anyway. There was nothing left for me here. Every street, every familiar face, every corner of the city felt tainted, suffocating. The memories I had built with Madison, weekend getaways, late-night conversations, whispered dreams of the future, they were all nothing now. Ghosts of a life that had never truly been mine to begin with. So I packed. I didn't give my parents a grand explanation. I didn't tell them where I was going. I just left. I took what I needed, sold what I didn't, and drove until the city that had been my home was nothing more than a distant blur in my rearview mirror. I didn't stop until the weight in my chest loosened, until I could breathe without feeling like my lungs were full of smoke. I needed distance. I needed to start over. And I swore to myself I would never look back. 3 years passed. 3 years of silence, of carefully constructing a life where the past could no longer reach me. I had severed ties, deleted contacts, and ensured that the people I once called family no longer had any access to me. My phone number was private, my social media accounts non-existent. I had no desire to look back. No reason to revisit a life that had already burned to the ground. But the past has a way of finding you, no matter how far you run. It was a quiet evening when my doorbell rang. At first, I ignored it. No one ever came to my door unannounced. My life had been designed to prevent unexpected visits. But the ringing persisted, an insistent chime that refused to be ignored. When I finally opened the door, the sight before me felt like a punch to the gut. Madison stood there, clutching the hand of a small child. She looked nothing like the woman I once knew. The years had worn her down, stripped her of the effortless confidence she used to carry. Her face was thinner, her skin paler. Dark circles framed her eyes, filled with a weight I had never seen before. Whatever had happened since we last saw each other had drained the life out of her. But it was the child who caught my attention. A little girl, no older than 3, with wide eyes filled with confusion. She clung to Madison's leg, peeking up at me with a wary curiosity, as if trying to understand who I was and why she was here. I didn't have to ask. I already knew. Ryan had abandoned them. I felt nothing at first. No sympathy, no shock. Just a cold detachment, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. Of course Ryan had left. Of course he had run the moment responsibility became real. It was what he had always done. And yet, somehow, my mother had the audacity to send her to me, expecting me to pick up the pieces of the mess her beloved son had left behind. I wanted to slam the door in her face. I should have. But then I looked at the child again. My niece. She was innocent in all of this. She didn't choose to be born into this chaos. She had done nothing to deserve being abandoned. Being dragged to the doorstep of a man who wanted nothing to do with the people responsible for ruining his life. For the first time in years, I felt something other than anger. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't understanding. But it was something. I took a deep breath, exhaling the ghosts of a past I thought I had buried. And then, against every instinct screaming at me to turn them away, I stepped aside and let them in. I let them in. Not because I forgave Madison, not because I had found some hidden reserve of sympathy, but because a child should never have to suffer for the sins of their parents. Whatever anger still burned inside me wasn't meant for the innocent little girl clutching at the hem of Madison's worn-out coat. It wasn't her fault that the world she was born into was built on lies and betrayal. Madison sat across from me, her shoulders hunched, her hands gripping the fabric of her sleeves as if holding herself together. She told me everything, how Ryan had charmed her into believing that what they had was real, how he had sworn he would take care of her, how he had promised her a life that never existed beyond the fantasies he spun so easily. Then one day he simply left. No explanation, no warning, just a few words muttered over his shoulder before he disappeared from their lives entirely. I listened in silence, my face unreadable as she unraveled the wreckage of her choices in front of me. I heard the desperation in her voice, the regret laced through every syllable. But regret wasn't redemption and desperation wasn't an excuse. She wanted help. She wanted a lifeline. But she wouldn't find it here. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and grabbed the small envelope of cash I kept for emergencies. When I handed it to her, the weight of it felt strangely insignificant in my palm. "This should get you through for a while," I said, my voice even detached. "Find a lawyer. File for child support. Whatever happens next, make sure Ryan is held accountable for what he's done. But don't contact me again." Her lip trembled. Tears filled her eyes, spilling over as she reached for my arm. But I stepped back before she could touch me. There was nothing left between us. No anger, no love, just an empty space where something had once been. She begged. She pleaded. Said she had nowhere else to go. That she had no one left. But I had nothing left to give. The little girl clung to her mother's leg, confused by the tension in the room. Too young to understand the weight of the moment, I crouched down, met her wide eyes, and for the first time I let myself feel something, not for Madison, not for Ryan, but for her. She deserved better. Better than them. Better than me. "Take care of her," I said quietly. And then I turned away. The door closed behind them, the sound ringing through the empty space like the final note of a song that had gone on too long. I stood there, staring at the door, waiting for something to rise in me. Relief, satisfaction, anything. But there was only silence and the quiet realization that this was how it was always meant to end. Some betrayals can't be undone. Some wounds never heal. But moving on, that at least, was a choice. And I had finally made mine. This story serves as a harsh reminder that not all wounds can heal, and not everyone who enters our lives is meant to stay. Sometimes, the only way to truly move forward is to let go of what once broke us. Remember, betrayal does not define you, how you rise from it does. Life can be cruel, but it also gives us the power to choose. Dwell in the past or step beyond it to build something new. What are your thoughts on this story? Is it a tale of liberation, tragedy, or a lesson we can all learn from? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to continue this journey through more thought-provoking stories, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next. My father tried to steal my life's work and give it to my unqualified stepbrother, thinking I would be powerless to stop him. But I saw it coming, outmaneuvered them, exposed their fraud, and built my own biotech empire, proving that real success is the best revenge. No one wakes up expecting their entire life's work to be stolen in broad daylight, handed off like a cheap souvenir to someone who didn't even deserve to be in the same room as it. But that's exactly what happened to me. That morning was like any other, coffee gone cold on my desk, the hum of the centrifuge, the faint scent of ethanol lingering in the air. I had spent the better part of a decade perfecting a targeted molecular drug delivery system that had the potential to change the landscape of cancer treatment. Years of my life were poured into this. Every ounce of knowledge, every sleepless night, every sacrifice. And yet, in the blink of an eye, all of it was ripped away. Then, my phone rang. I remember the moment with crystal clarity. The harsh vibration against the steel countertop. The way my stomach clenched before I even picked it up. It was my father's name on the screen, and for a fleeting second, I thought maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be another one of his usual dismissive calls. Maybe this time he was calling to acknowledge what I had built. But deep down, I already knew better. "I've transferred your research patent to your stepbrother," he said, like he was discussing a minor restructuring move. "He deserves it more than you. He knows how to commercialize it properly." The words didn't hit all at once. At first, they lingered in the air, weightless and meaningless, as if my brain refused to process them. But when they did, felt like something inside me cracked. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white, my heartbeat thudding so loudly in my ears that I almost didn't hear the next thing he said. "Brookhaven Biotech funded your research," he continued. "Everything you develop belongs to the company. And as CEO, I decide who handles what." My breath came shallow and sharp, the sharp edge of betrayal slicing through my chest like a scalpel. I had known my father was ruthless in business, but I had naively believed that, on some fundamental level, I was more than just another asset to be leveraged. That my work, my blood, sweat, and years meant something more to him than another number on a balance sheet. I glanced at my screen. Sitting there, unread, was an email from the U.S. Patent Office. It had been sent 3 months ago, confirming receipt of the independent patent application I had filed. A lifeline. A shield I had crafted in anticipation of the moment I had desperately hoped wouldn't come. But it had. I exhaled slowly, forcing my voice into something resembling composure, though inside, the storm was raging. He thought he had blindsided me. He thought he had won. But what he didn't know was that I had seen this coming for years. I had spent months watching as the ground beneath me shifted as he carefully maneuvered me out of projects, reallocated funding, and strategically positioned my stepbrother in places he had no business being. It had started subtly, access to my own research slowly becoming more restricted. My name being left off internal reports that I had authored, private meetings about my work happening without me. And then there was Ryan, slinking into the frame, grinning like he had already claimed his prize. Ryan had always been more of an opportunist than a scientist. He knew the right people, spoke the right jargon, and excelled in the art of being in the right place at the right time. But understanding the nuances of biochemistry, the intricate, painstaking work that went into something like this, he had no clue. And now, my father had handed him my life's work on a silver platter. The betrayal burned deep, a slow and festering ache that pulsed beneath my ribs. Not because I had lost something I hadn't, not yet, but because he had thought he could take it from me so easily. As if I would stand idly by, as if I had not spent years anticipating his every move, preparing for the inevitable. The truth was, I had known my father long enough to never fully trust him. He was a strategist before he was a parent, a businessman before he was anything remotely human. And so, I had done what I always did. I planned. I planned for every possible outcome. I had spent the last 6 months compiling evidence, filing my patents independently and ensuring that every key discovery, every crucial breakthrough had been documented in a way that made it indisputable. I had secured funding, forged alliances, and, most importantly, made sure that my research was untouchable. So as my father sat on the other end of the line, waiting for my reaction, expecting outrage, expecting me to lash out or beg, I did the one thing he never saw coming. I smiled, not because I found any of this amusing, but because I had already won. The wheels had been set in motion long before this moment, and now, they would crush him. I steadied my breathing and leaned back in my chair, the weight of years of sacrifice pressing against my spine. He thought he had taken everything from me, but what he had really done was light the fuse of his own undoing. I had been playing his game for years, but the difference between us, I was always 10 steps ahead, and now, he was about to find out exactly what that meant. The first time I realized I was being pushed out, I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia. After all, I had spent years at Brookhaven Biotech, pouring every ounce of my energy into research that could save lives. I was my father's firstborn, his flesh and blood. I had earned my place. Surely, no rational man would cast his own son aside in favor of an outsider who had walked into his life a mere 2 years ago. But paranoia has a way of turning into reality when the signs refuse to be ignored. It started with small inconveniences, subtle, almost imperceptible at first. My research access was restricted for reasons that were always conveniently vague. My login credentials would mysteriously stop working overnight, forcing me to waste hours waiting for IT to look into it. My emails about funding requests were met with silence, despite previously having an open line of communication with the finance team. At first, I made excuses. Maybe it was just bureaucratic red tape. Maybe it was an unfortunate coincidence. But coincidences don't happen again and again and again. Then, my team members started getting reassigned. The people who had worked alongside me for years, colleagues I trusted, were suddenly being moved to unrelated projects with no explanation. A few of them expressed concern but admitted that they felt pressured to accept the transfers. Some were promised promotions, others were simply given no choice. The team that I had painstakingly built, the group that had brought my vision to life, was unraveling before my eyes. The funding cuts came next, bit by bit. My project's resources were quietly slashed, just enough to slow progress but not enough to raise alarms. I had to fight for materials, justify every minor expenditure, and battle the sudden influx of bureaucratic red tape that had never been there before. My father knew better than to cut me off outright. That would be too obvious. Instead, he chose the slow, methodical route, hoping I wouldn't notice until it was too late. But I did notice. And the final straw? Ryan started showing up to my strategy meetings. The first time it happened, I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. This was a man who had no scientific background, no experience in pharmaceuticals, no knowledge of research or development. His expertise, networking, social climbing, and schmoozing at overpriced business retreats. And yet here he was, strolling into my meetings like he belonged there, nodding along as if he even remotely understood what was being discussed. At first he was quiet, observing, taking notes. But then he started asking questions, bad ones. Questions that revealed just how little he understood. He would nod at the right moments, throw in a few buzzwords he had clearly memorized, and pretend as if he had an actual role to play. But he was a fraud, and every single person in that room knew it. And yet, no one said a thing. That was when the reality of the situation hit me. He wasn't just sitting in. He was being groomed. It was no longer just about my funding being cut or my team being reassigned. This was a full-scale takeover. My father wasn't just pushing me out, he was installing Ryan in my place. He was setting the stage for Ryan to claim my research as his own, to take credit for something he didn't even have the capacity to understand. That's when I knew I had to act. Fast. I reached out to Savannah Park, an old friend from college who had since built a reputation as one of the most ruthless intellectual property lawyers in the industry. If there was anyone who could help me fight back, it was her. She listened carefully as I laid out everything: the restricted access, the reassigned team members, the funding cuts, Ryan's sudden involvement. When I finished, there was a long silence before she finally spoke. "Document everything," she said, her voice measured and firm. "Every email, every meeting, every funding cut, every instance where you were sidelined. And most importantly, file your own patent independently of the company." And so I did. Nights, weekends, holidays. I poured everything into making sure that my research was protected. I compiled exhaustive documentation, every milestone, every breakthrough, every experiment conducted outside of company resources. I made sure it was witnessed, logged, and verified. My personal lab became my fortress, and every discovery I made was shielded from prying eyes. By the time my father made his move, it was already too late. He thought he was orchestrating a quiet coup, that I would be caught off guard, that I would be powerless to stop him. He thought I would fight back blindly, desperately, without preparation. He was wrong, because I had been preparing for this moment from the very beginning. And now it was his turn to be caught off guard. The moment my father tried to transfer the patent, the system flagged it. An automatic red flag. It was immediate. Within minutes, it was logged as a fraudulent attempt, and the investigation began. Savannah called me within the hour. Her voice was electric with satisfaction. "Bingo," she said, almost laughing. "They walked right into it. Their attempt to transfer ownership has already been flagged as a fraudulent claim." I let the words sink in, the weight of it filling the space around me. Months, no. Years of preparation had led to this moment. The house of cards my father had meticulously built was about to collapse, and for the first time, he wasn't in control of the fallout. What followed was nothing short of a legal firestorm. Every document I had compiled, every piece of evidence meticulously collected, was now a weapon in my arsenal. The independent witnesses, the signed affidavits, the digital logs proving that the most critical breakthroughs had been achieved outside of company resources, all of it was airtight. It was no longer just my word against my father's. It was fact against fraud. The patent office launched a formal investigation almost immediately. That alone would have been bad enough for my father. But it didn't stop there. Regulators started asking questions. Investors started paying attention. The very empire he had spent decades crafting was suddenly teetering on the edge of collapse. And for the first time in his perfectly orchestrated corporate life, my father was scrambling. I imagined him sitting at his oversized desk, jaw clenched, as the news flooded in. The email chains, the emergency calls, the urgent strategy meetings where his legal team frantically tried to contain the damage. But it was already out of his hands. Every loophole he had once used to manipulate the system had turned into a noose tightening around his own neck. Emails flooded my inbox. Some from his legal team, thinly veiled threats disguised as negotiation attempts. Others from people within Brookhaven Biotech who had always seen me as an outsider but were now reaching out, desperate to distance themselves from the sinking ship. And then, the part that truly sealed his fate, the media caught wind of the scandal. Articles started circulating within hours, spreading like wildfire. Brookhaven Biotech CEO under investigation for attempted patent fraud. Boardroom betrayal. A father's attempt to steal his son's legacy. Who is Ryan Holloway? And why was he given a patent he doesn't understand? The last one was my personal favorite. The vultures had begun circling. And Ryan was about to learn what it was like to be devoured by the very industry he thought he could manipulate. Ryan did what any entitled fraudster would do. He went on a full-scale damage control campaign. Interviews, public statements, even carefully curated social media posts that tried to frame the whole debacle as a misunderstanding. It didn't work, because the moment he opened his mouth, it became painfully clear he had no idea what he was talking about. When reporters pressed him for technical details, his responses were vague at best, blatantly incorrect at worst. He fumbled through explanations, misused fundamental terms, and at one point even tried to compare targeted drug delivery systems to ride-sharing apps. The world saw him for what he was, An imposter. And my father? He had tied his reputation to Ryan. That meant that every single failure, every exposed lie, dragged him down too, while they were drowning in a PR catastrophe. I was too busy building something better. Helios Biotech. I had spent years watching how my father ran his company, studying every flaw, every mistake. And now, I had the chance to create something free from his corruption. The investors who had turned their backs on Brookhaven Biotech, they were already knocking on my door. The scientists who had been stifled under my father's leadership, they were reaching out, eager to join something where integrity mattered. Brookhaven was burning, and I was rising from its ashes. The world would soon see the truth. My father had tried to bury me, but all he had done was plant the seed for something far greater than he could ever imagine. Brookhaven Biotech fell like a crumbling tower. The company that once commanded respect in the pharmaceutical world had become a cautionary tale, a symbol of greed, deception, and corporate betrayal. My father, the board forced him out. The same people who once hailed him as a visionary had now turned their backs on him, treating him as nothing more than a liability they needed to cut free. The shareholders had no patience for scandals, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. They had no choice but to remove him before he took the company down even further. Ryan? Utterly disgraced. The industry he once thought he could bluff his way through had chewed him up and spit him out. His credibility? Gone. The same people who had once welcomed him into boardrooms and high-profile events now avoided his calls, erased his name from their contacts. The last I heard, he had vanished from the public eye entirely. A man who had flown too close to the sun and burned beyond recognition. And me, Helios Biotech, was thriving. Investors who had witnessed the scandal unfold knew exactly which side to bet on. The moment Brookhaven crumbled, my company soared. I had funding, top-tier researchers flocking to join me, and full creative control over the innovations I had fought so hard to protect. No board politics, no corporate deception, just science, integrity, and the future I was determined to build. But then, one night, my father showed up at my office. It was late. Most of my team had already left for the evening, but I was still there, working, refining, pushing forward. When I looked up, I barely recognized him. He looked old. Not just physically, but spiritually drained, like a man who had spent his entire life climbing a mountain, only to reach the top and realize he was completely alone. His suit, once impeccably tailored, hung on him like it no longer fit. His posture, once commanding, now slumped under the weight of defeat. He sat down without waiting for an invitation, a shell of the man he once was. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at Robert Holloway, the powerful CEO. I was looking at a man who had lost everything. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the air between us thick with unspoken history. The years of resentment, the betrayal, the war that had torn us apart. And then he spoke. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "You must be happy now." Happy? The word lingered in the air, hollow and meaningless. I should have been happy. I had one. But as I stared at him, this man who had once held my future in his hands and crushed it without a second thought, I realized something. There was no victory in this. Yes, I had built something better. Something free from his corruption. But there was no satisfaction in watching a man dismantle his own legacy with his own hands. There was no triumph in seeing him sit before me reduced to nothing more than regret and exhaustion. I exhaled slowly, letting go of the last remnants of the anger that had fueled me for so long. No, I said at last, but I am free. And that was the only thing that had ever truly mattered. They say revenge is sweet, but you know what's even better? Reclaiming everything they tried to take, and realizing you never needed their validation in the first place. I didn't just win. I built something on my own terms, something real, something no one could ever steal from me again. And that is my story. A journey from betrayal, struggle to rebirth. A testament that no one gets to decide your fate but you. This story isn't just about revenge, it's about the value of perseverance, the power of freedom, and the strength to rebuild from the ashes. It serves as a reminder that sometimes, losing everything is the opportunity to reclaim yourself. Not every betrayal is the end, sometimes it's the beginning of something greater. Success isn't about proving something to others. It's about proving it to yourself. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to rise above injustice? What would you do if everything you worked for was taken away? Leave a comment. Share your thoughts and let me know what you think about this story. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because sometimes the most real stories are the ones that teach us the greatest lessons. Thought I had the perfect college setup, living with my girlfriend and best friends, until I found out she was hooking up with the guy next door while I was in class. My best friend's girlfriend found out and kicked her out before I even had to. You ever have that gut feeling that something is off? but you keep pushing it aside, telling yourself you're just being paranoid? Yeah, that was me for months. And let me tell you, I wish I had trusted my instincts sooner. What started as an ideal college apartment setup with my best friends and my long-term girlfriend turned into the most surreal, gut-wrenching experience of my life. Looking back, the signs were all there. I just didn't want to see them. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button, trust me. You won't want to miss the next crazy story. Alright, let's get into it. So let me paint the picture for you. My name's Jake, and at the time I was a junior in college. I was living in a shared apartment with 3 other people. My girlfriend of 2 years, Natalie, my best friend, Ethan, and his girlfriend, Olivia. It was supposed to be the dream setup, 2 couples, evenly splitting rent and utilities, having late-night study sessions, ordering pizza after a long day of classes, and just existing together in a way that felt effortless. We were more than just roommates, we were a makeshift little family. Or at least, that's what I thought. The apartment itself was originally leased by Natalie and Olivia. It was meant to be a 3-girl setup, a cozy place with string lights in the common area, a perfectly curated Pinterest aesthetic, and all the little comforts of home. But things didn't go as planned. The 3rd girl, who was supposed to move in, bailed at the last minute. She left them scrambling, trying to figure out how to afford the rent on their own. Natalie was stressed, Olivia was worried, and it was a mess. I was practically living there anyway, spending nearly every night at Natalie's, my things already scattered throughout her room. When my own lease was up, moving in seemed like the logical choice, a way to help them while making things more convenient for me. It felt like a win-win. Then Ethan moved in. His situation was different. His parents sold their house and relocated out of state, and he wasn't ready to pick up his entire life and leave with them. He needed a place to stay, and the timing just worked out. He was my best friend, and Olivia was already Natalie's closest friend, so it seemed perfect. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement at first, but eventually, we all settled into this comfortable rhythm that felt like it could last forever. We had a system. Olivia did most of the cooking because she genuinely enjoyed it. Ethan took care of fixing random things around the apartment. Natalie kept everything looking nice and organized. And I contributed where I could. We had this unspoken agreement about responsibilities, about boundaries, about making it work. It was a small piece of stability in the chaotic world of college life. For a while, it was exactly what I needed. The apartment itself was beautiful. An older building with big windows, a balcony overlooking a busy street where we'd sit with beers and talk about our futures, and an open floor plan that made everything feel warm and inviting. The living room was the heart of it all. We'd spend nights piled onto the couch watching reruns of old sitcoms, laughing at inside jokes that only made sense to us. There were late-night debates about the dumbest topics, whether pineapple belonged on pizza, which was the superior Harry Potter movie, who had the worst professor that semester. It felt like home in a way I hadn't experienced before. But beneath that, something was shifting. I didn't see it then, but looking back, there were cracks forming in the foundation. Little things that didn't seem significant at the time but now stick out in my memory like neon signs. The way Natalie started closing her laptop when I walked into the room. The way she suddenly became secretive with her phone, angling the screen away from me in a way she never had before. The way she started skipping classes, something she used to take so seriously. I chalked it up to stress. College was hard, and finals were creeping up on us. Maybe she was just overwhelmed. Maybe I was overthinking things. I trusted her. I trusted them all. Maybe that was my first mistake. The first weird thing? Natalie started skipping classes more often. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. She used to be obsessive about school, always planning her schedule down to the minute, keeping color-coded notes, and making sure she never missed a lecture unless she was physically incapable of getting out of bed. That's why it struck me as odd when she started skipping here and there, giving vague excuses about how certain professors were useless or how she could just teach herself better than they could. It wasn't the skipping that bothered me the most. It was the way she brushed it off like it didn't matter. That wasn't her. Natalie always cared. Then came the day that really set me on edge. I remember it clearly because it had been a rough week for both of us, and I wanted to do something nice. She had an afternoon class, one that she had complained about before but still made sure to attend. I figured I'd surprise her afterward with her favorite sandwich from the deli nearby, just a small gesture to cheer her up. I got there early, leaned against a tree outside the lecture hall, and waited. I watched as students trickled out, chatting, adjusting their bags, rushing off to their next destinations. I scanned every face, expecting to see hers any second. She never appeared. My stomach twisted into a knot. Maybe she was just running late? Maybe she got caught up talking to someone inside? I checked my phone. Shot her a quick text. Hey, where are you? A few seconds later, she responded, just got out, heading home to study. I stared at the screen. That didn't make sense. I had just watched the entire class exit, and she hadn't been among them. My first instinct was that I must have somehow missed her in the crowd. Maybe she took a different exit? Maybe she really had been inside, but I just hadn't noticed? Still, something about the situation gnawed at me. Called her. No answer. That was strange. Natalie always had her phone within reach. If she was actively texting me, why wouldn't she pick up? Maybe she had already started walking and didn't hear the call? I tried to reason with myself, but the seed of doubt had been planted. I ended up going back to my car, eating the sandwich alone, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. Later that night, when we were both home, I casually asked about her class. I wasn't trying to interrogate her, just making conversation, hoping that whatever weird feeling I had would go away once she told me how boring the lecture was. Instead, she hesitated. That hesitation was everything. A brief pause, the flicker of discomfort in her expression before she quickly recovered. Oh, I skipped, she finally admitted, voice light, almost dismissive. Professor sucks at explaining things. The words were casual, but her body language wasn't. She didn't look at me when she said it. Instead, she busied herself with her phone, scrolling through something mindlessly as if the conversation wasn't important. But it was important. Not because she had skipped, people miss classes all the time, but because she had lied about it. She had told me she had just gotten out, heading home to study. But that wasn't true. And the way she acted when I brought it up, the way she seemed slightly on edge, like she was waiting to see if I would press further, made my skin crawl. I didn't push. I told myself not to overthink it. People skip class. It's college. Maybe she had been embarrassed about it. Maybe she thought I would judge her for slacking off. I convinced myself that I was just being paranoid, that I was reading too much into things. But deep down, something about it wouldn't let go. It was a small lie. A seemingly harmless one. But that's the thing about lies, they don't stay small. They grow, they fester, they lead to more. And at that moment, I had no idea just how deep this particular lie would take me. Started as nothing. A routine moment. Something so mundane that I almost didn't give it a second thought. I was taking out the trash, shifting things around in the overflowing bin when my eyes landed on something that didn't belong. A small, crumpled wrapper peeking out from behind a cereal box. Red and black. Distinct. Familiar. My mind took a second to register what I was looking at. A condom wrapper. Not just any condom wrapper, but the exact brand that Natalie and I used. The one we kept in my nightstand. In the drawer beneath the socks. A place that neither Ethan nor Olivia had any reason to go near. And that's when the first alarm bell rang in my head. My first instinct wasn't immediate panic. I ran through the possible explanations. Maybe Olivia and Ethan had run out and grabbed one from our stash? It would be weird, sure, but we were all close. Maybe they assumed we wouldn't mind. Maybe one of them had borrowed one and forgotten to mention it. A stretch, but not impossible. Still, it nagged at me. Olivia and Ethan always used the free ones from the health center. I had seen the little green and white wrappers before, tossed into their bathroom trash can. They never bought the kind Natalie and I used. It was a tiny detail, but it didn't sit right. I picked up the wrapper and turned it over in my hands, staring at it for longer than I probably should have. The apartment was quiet except for the faint sound of a show playing in the background from the living room. My fingers tightened around the plastic before I forced myself to drop it back into the trash, telling myself it was nothing. Just a coincidence. I was overthinking. Stress did that to people, right? But then came Natalie's reaction. And that was the moment I knew. This wasn't just in my head. Later that night, when we were both in the kitchen, I casually mentioned it. Just an offhand comment. Something lighthearted, like, hey, I think Olivia or Ethan might have borrowed one of ours. I was expecting a laugh. A shrug. Maybe even a quick, oh yeah, I noticed that too. What I got instead was the complete opposite. Her eyes went wide just for a split second, but it was enough. A moment of sheer panic before she forced her face back to neutral. Then, almost immediately, she launched into a rant about privacy. About how disgusting it was that anyone would take something so personal without asking. I stood there, listening, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Her reaction didn't match the situation. It was too strong, too defensive. If she truly thought Ethan or Olivia had taken one, she would have been mildly annoyed, maybe a little grossed out. But this was something else entirely. And then she said it, the line that made my stomach sink. Don't bring it up. It's awkward. Just let it go. I felt the first real pit form in my stomach. That was the moment everything started to shift. The moment when my world tilted just slightly. When doubt stopped being a fleeting whisper in the back of my mind and became something louder, something undeniable. I could feel it pressing against my ribs, creeping up my spine like a cold, unwanted presence. It wasn't just the condom wrapper. It was everything leading up to this. The skipped classes, the sudden secrecy, the way she had been acting just a little different, just a little off. The feeling that I had been pushing down for weeks, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But paranoia doesn't come with evidence. And now? Now I had evidence. I didn't press the issue that night. I didn't ask more questions. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind wouldn't stop spinning. Every interaction, every strange moment, every offhand comment she had made in the past month replayed in my head like a movie on loop, and for the first time, I let myself really wonder if I was missing something big. The worst part? I already knew the answer. The final straw came from our next-door neighbors. We weren't exactly close, but we had that casual, neighborly dynamic, you know, the kind where you nod in the hallway, swap small talk about sports or the weather, maybe borrow a cup of sugar when you're desperate. They were just familiar faces, people I barely gave a second thought to on most days. Until one morning, when everything changed. I was locking up to head out when I ran into Ryan, one of the guys from next door. He was sipping coffee, looking half asleep but still alert enough to make conversation. Just as I turned to leave, he smirked and dropped a comment so casually, so offhandedly, that it barely registered at first. "Man, you and Natalie gotta chill with the morning sessions," he chuckled. "Walls are way too thin." I laughed. Automatically. The kind of polite, reflexive laugh you give when someone makes an inappropriate joke and you're not sure how else to react. I didn't even process the words right away, not really. It wasn't until I was halfway down the stairwell that the meaning sank in and my steps faltered. Morning sessions? Natalie and I hadn't had sex in the morning in over a month. Hell, maybe longer. Final stress, schedules being out of sync, all the usual excuses. But if it wasn't us, then who the hell was it? My stomach twisted into knots. My mind raced through every possibility, grasping at something, anything, that didn't lead to the conclusion forming in my head. Maybe Ryan was mistaken. Maybe he had the wrong apartment. Maybe Olivia and Ethan had come back early one weekend without telling me. But no, that didn't make sense. I knew for a fact that they always spent weekends out of town at Olivia's parents' place. It was a routine as predictable as the sunrise. And even if by some chance they had stayed behind, wouldn't they have told me? Wouldn't I have noticed? I tried to brush it off, tried to convince myself it was a misunderstanding. But that seed of doubt had been planted and it was growing fast. My brain replayed the comment over and over, dissecting every word, every possible implication. The timeline didn't add up. The habits didn't fit. And worst of all, there had been signs, small, insignificant things I had ignored at the time, but now they came rushing back all at once. The way Natalie had been acting lately. The sudden need for space, the excuses, the skipped classes. The defensiveness, the condom wrapper, the weird silences, the way she avoided looking me in the eye when I asked innocent questions. It was like my brain had been trying to put together a puzzle for weeks, but I had been too blind, too trusting to see the picture coming together. I could feel my pulse in my throat as I reached my car. My hands were shaking as I gripped the wheel, knuckles white. I didn't even start the engine right away. I just sat there, staring at nothing, trying to slow my breathing, trying to process what I had just realized. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I already did. There was someone else in my apartment. And they weren't just spending the night. They were spending the mornings too. The next morning I woke up with a knot in my stomach. Sleep had barely touched me. And whatever brief moments of rest I had managed to steal were filled with half-formed nightmares, flashes of laughter, whispers behind closed doors, a vague sense of something being taken from me. The weight of my suspicions pressed down like a heavy stone, refusing to budge. I needed answers. I left for class as usual, making sure my routine was unchanged. I walked out the door at the same time, took the usual route. But instead of heading toward campus, I took a detour, looping back through a different entrance of the apartment building. The cold air burned my lungs, but I barely noticed. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. When I reached my door, I paused. My hand hovered over the doorknob. Part of me wanted to turn back, to pretend I hadn't noticed the warning signs, to keep living in the comfortable lie I had built. But the other part, the part that was exhausted, frayed, desperate, needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. And then I heard it. Laughter. Not just any laughter, Natalie's. That familiar, light, effortless sound. The kind that used to be just for me. Only this time she wasn't alone. A deeper voice joined hers, amused, casual. A voice I recognized instantly. A voice that didn't belong in my apartment when I wasn't home. Ryan. Ryan was one of our neighbors, the kind of guy who was always around but never quite part of our group. We weren't close, but he was friendly enough. always cracking jokes when we ran into each other in the hallway, making small talk about weekend plans, the kind of guy who could blend in anywhere. But now, hearing him inside my apartment, his voice so casual and comfortable felt like a violation. Like he had been there longer than I realized. The cold realization hit me like a slap. I stood frozen. My mind caught between fight and flight. Every logical part of me wanted to take a breath, to calm down, to give them the benefit of the doubt. But my instincts, the ones I had ignored for far too long, were screaming. With shaky hands, I fumbled with my keys. It felt like my fingers weren't working properly, like my body was rejecting what I was about to do. Finally, after what felt like forever, the key slid into the lock. I turned it. The second the door swung open, everything inside came to a screeching halt. Dead silence. Natalie and Ryan sat on the couch, too close, their bodies angled toward each other. Their expressions shifted in an instant, from casual to shocked, from comfortable to exposed. It was like watching the mask of a performer slip mid-show, revealing the truth underneath. Natalie's eyes went wide, her mouth slightly open, as if she was trying to form words but couldn't find any. Ryan tensed, his jaw tightening. He didn't even bother to move away from her. He just sat there waiting to see what I would do. And in that moment, I didn't need explanations. I didn't need excuses. I could see everything I needed to know written all over their faces. A slow, searing kind of betrayal settled deep in my chest. The kind that didn't explode outward in rage but instead burned from the inside, twisting into something heavy and unbearable. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. But more than anything, I wanted to rewind time, to unhear the laughter, to unsee the way they were looking at each other when they thought no one was watching. My grip on the doorknob tightened until my knuckles turned white. I exhaled a bitter, hollow sound. Then, in the quietest, calmest voice I could muster, I muttered, "Nice? Real nice." Natalie shot up from the couch. "Wait." But I didn't wait. I turned and walked out. She called after me, her voice desperate, but I kept going. Down the stairs, through the lobby, out into the street. My vision blurred, not with tears, but with sheer overwhelming emotion. Humiliation, anger, heartbreak. It all mixed together in a suffocating whirlwind that I couldn't escape from. I barely noticed where I was walking. I just knew I needed to get away. From her, from Ryan, from the apartment that suddenly felt like a stranger's place, filled with memories I no longer wanted. I had thought betrayal would feel like a sharp, instant wound, but I was wrong. It wasn't a knife to the gut, it was a slow, smothering thing, creeping into every part of me, making it impossible to breathe. And worst of all, I had seen it coming. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. That night, I crashed at a friend's place, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, Natalie's wide-eyed panic, Ryan's stunned silence. My mind replayed the scene over and over, dissecting every detail, searching for something I had missed. But there was nothing left to analyze. The truth had been laid bare, and it was uglier than I ever imagined. Natalie bombarded my phone with texts. The first few were frantic apologies. She needed to explain. She needed me to hear her out. Then came the desperation. She was having an anxiety attack. She couldn't breathe. She needed me. When that didn't work, the gaslighting started. "You're being ridiculous. We were just talking, right?" Because just talking always results in the kind of full-body freeze that happens when you know you've been caught red-handed. I ignored every message, every call. Let them pile up like debris from a storm I no longer wanted any part of. The fallout spread quickly. Olivia found out first. She was furious, not just at Natalie, but at the deception. At the sheer audacity of it all. She and Natalie had been close for years, and now it was like she was seeing her for the first time. Ethan, on the other hand, was ready to throw hands. I had never seen him that angry before, and frankly, it made me glad I had left when I did. If I had stayed, I don't know how things would have escalated. Natalie didn't last long in the apartment after that. She packed her things within days, avoiding eye contact, moving like a ghost through the space she had once made her home. The place felt different without her. Quieter. Emptier. But not in a bad way, more like something rotten had finally been cleared out, leaving behind air that was easier to breathe. And me? I existed in a haze for a while. The betrayal wasn't just about losing her, it was about losing trust, about questioning every decision I had ever made. How had I missed the signs? How had I let someone so deeply woven into my life become a stranger overnight? The grief came in waves. Some days I felt nothing. Other days I felt everything at once. I poured myself into my studies, into anything that would keep my mind occupied. I stopped going to the places where I knew I might run into her. I deleted our old pictures, our messages. Wiped every digital trace of her from my life. It felt petty at first, but with each action I felt lighter, more in control. The hardest part was learning to trust again. Every interaction felt like it came with a hidden catch, every new connection like a risk I wasn't sure I was ready to take. But time has a way of dulling even the sharpest wounds. Slowly, I built myself back up. I focused on my future, on the things that mattered. I cut out toxic people, kept my circle small, and learned to listen to my instincts when they whispered that something was wrong. Because now I knew better. I knew that betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It's hidden in the small moments, in the skipped classes, in the way someone angles their phone away from you, in the hollow excuses that you want so badly to believe. And most of all, I knew that the person I had been before, naive, trusting, blindly hopeful, was gone. But in his place, someone stronger had taken root. If there's anything I learned from this, it's to trust my instincts. That little voice in the back of my head, the one I ignored, the one that tried to warn me, was never wrong. When something feels off, it probably is. And when someone truly cares about you, they won't put you in a position where you have to question their loyalty. Love doesn't come with conditions, with half-truths, with moments of doubt that gnaw at you until they become impossible to ignore. Love, at its core, is supposed to feel safe. And what I had with Natalie, that wasn't love. It took me a long time to come to terms with that. The realization wasn't immediate. It crept up on me in the quiet moments, when I passed by places we used to go together. When I caught myself reaching for my phone before remembering there was no one to text. When I thought about all the nights I spent making excuses for someone who had already checked out of our relationship long before I discovered the truth. The betrayal wasn't just about what she did. It was about everything she let me believe. The false sense of security. The way she smiled at me like nothing was wrong. The illusion she let me live in while she carved out an escape plan behind my back. That was what cut the deepest. It wasn't just losing her. It was losing the version of our relationship I had built up in my mind, the one that had never actually existed. And what about Natalie and Ryan? Last I heard, they didn't even last 2 months. I wasn't surprised. Relationships built on deception never go the distance. You can't build something real on a foundation of broken trust, no matter how hard you try to convince yourself otherwise. I don't know who ended things first, and honestly, I don't care. The moment I walked out of that apartment, they stopped existing in my world. I used to wonder if she ever regretted it. If there were nights where she stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything she had thrown away. If she ever scrolled through our old pictures, wondering how she let something good slip through her fingers. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Regret doesn't undo what's been done. And even if she did regret it, it wouldn't change anything for me. I wasn't the guy anymore, the one who would have taken her back. Who would have clung to whatever scraps of affection she had left to offer. So yeah, that's how my seemingly perfect college setup turned into a train wreck. And honestly, I wouldn't change a thing. Because now I know my worth. I know what I bring to the table. I know what it means to be with someone who values me, who doesn't make me feel like I have to compete for their attention. I know that love isn't supposed to be a guessing game. And trust me, my worth? It's way more than what she ever deserved. Life has a way of teaching us lessons we never signed up for, but in the end, we walk away stronger. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever ignored your gut, if you've ever learned your worth the hard way, let me know in the comments. Your thoughts, your stories, your takeaways, they matter. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like and subscribe, because trust me, there's always another story waiting to be told. They told me I was the problem and that I was ruining everything, so I walked away. But just days later, they're desperately asking me to come back. It's hard to explain what it feels like to carry the weight of something that's not even your fault. But if I could sum it up in one word, it would be guilt. Guilt because, in my dad's eyes, I was the reason my mom died. I didn't choose to be born, but in my dad's grief-stricken mind, my very existence was a constant reminder that his wife was gone. My name's Lily, and my entire life has been a series of painful attempts to prove my worth to a man who never saw me as worthy of anything other than resentment. Growing up, it was clear that my dad loved my older sister, Sarah, and that I was, well, an afterthought. I never felt the warmth or affection that should come from a father. Instead, I was a constant reminder of the loss he could never move past. From a young age, I could sense it, his anger, his detachment. I didn't understand it then, but I felt it. I was the one who had to live in the shadow of his grief, constantly trying to prove that I wasn't the monster he made me out to be. When you're the child who has been emotionally abandoned, the world feels like a very lonely place. No one tells you that the pain of being invisible runs deeper than any physical wound. It's the quiet ache that gnaws at your soul when you realize that no matter how much you give, how much you sacrifice, you'll always be the afterthought. I didn't understand it at first, but by the time I was 10 years old, it became clear Sarah's life was a world apart from mine. While I spent my days scrubbing dishes, cleaning up after my dad and sister, Sarah lived a life untouched by the responsibilities that weighed me down. She never had to help around the house. She was the special one, the golden child. Her hair always seemed to shine a little brighter, her smile a little wider, and somehow the air around her always felt lighter. She had the world's attention, and it was as though the universe bent to her whims. I was stuck in the role of the caretaker, always expected to do the dirty work, to carry the burdens. I never had the chance to experience what it felt like to just be. My dad didn't make me feel like I could be anything other than his disappointment. He constantly told me that I needed to learn how to be a good wife, as if that was the only aspiration I should have in life. His words were a constant reminder that nothing I ever did would measure up to what Sarah could achieve. It didn't matter that I was smart, my grades were always better than hers. It didn't matter that I had dreams of my own. All he saw in me was a mirror image of my mom, the woman who had died giving birth to me. Every day felt like a struggle to be seen, to be heard. But it was as if I was invisible to them. There was a heaviness in the air whenever I was around. A sense that I was always in the way, always interrupting their perfect little world. My dad's attention was always on Sarah. He'd watch her perform, shower her with praise for her achievements, no matter how trivial. When she played the piano, it was as if the world stood still. When she read a poem, it was as though Shakespeare himself had been reincarnated in her. The way he spoke about her left me feeling like a mere shadow. An unwanted presence in a room that should have felt like home. Sarah could do no wrong. Her mistakes were always excused, always forgiven. I'd watch as she made careless mistakes. And my dad would smile and tell her she just needed more time. I, on the other hand, had no such luxury. If I made a mistake, it was treated like a betrayal. If I failed at anything, it was a reflection of my inadequacy. I learned early on that nothing I did would ever be good enough for him. I could be perfect, but I'd still be overshadowed by Sarah's effortless charm. And then came the moments that cut deeper than any of the rest. It was the way my dad would talk about Sarah and me, as if comparing us was just a part of the natural order of things. Sarah needs to focus on her studies, he'd say. While you need to learn responsibility, you'll need it when you're older. That was the constant refrain. I was the worker and she was the beauty. I was the one who had to learn real life while Sarah was given the space to blossom and flourish. It was as though my life was meant to be practical and boring, while Sarah's was meant to be exceptional and inspiring. The weight of that expectation crushed me. I tried to hide it at first, tried to be the dutiful daughter who did everything they asked of me. But the more I gave, the more I realized that it was never going to be enough. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I took on, I was just a footnote in Sarah's story. My success was never celebrated, but hers was praised like it was the greatest thing the world had ever seen. She could never fail, not in their eyes. And I, no matter what I did, would always be the second choice, the backup plan, the other one. There was a suffocating loneliness that grew inside me, one that no one ever seemed to notice. I could feel it growing with every passing year. It was a kind of quiet emptiness that whispered to me day in and day out that I was never truly seen. I lived in a house filled with people who could not hear my pain, who could not see the invisible weight I carried. I started to feel like I was just a placeholder, a mere accessory to Sarah's life. Every time I tried to stand out, to make myself known, it felt like I was fighting a battle no one was willing to see. I couldn't understand why they didn't see me. I wasn't a bad person. I didn't want to be perfect like Sarah, but I wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged for who I was. I wanted to matter. But the truth was I didn't. I wasn't the one they cared about. They cared about the version of me that suited their needs. I was the one who could be controlled, who would never cause trouble. Sarah was the one they adored, the one who could do no wrong. And so, I spent my childhood learning how to be the invisible one. The one who didn't make waves. The one who did all the work, took on all the responsibility, and never asked for anything in return. I learned how to be quiet, how to shrink myself down into a space where no one would notice the weight I carried. I learned how to smile through the pain. How to pretend like it didn't hurt when my dad would say, "Sarah's the one who's going to change the world, not you." It was a lie I told myself every day, convincing myself that if I just tried hard enough, maybe, just maybe, I'd be the one they looked at. But deep down, I knew I was never going to be. I was the worker, the one who did the chores, who kept the house running. I was the one who made sure everything was in order, while Sarah was the one who got to chase her dreams. It didn't matter what I wanted. It didn't matter who I was. All that mattered was that Sarah shone, and I was content being in the background. But no one ever tells you that being invisible is a heavy burden to carry. They don't tell you how exhausting it is to constantly give, to constantly be the one who holds everything together, while everyone else gets the recognition. I tried to find solace in my own achievements, in the small victories that no one noticed, but the truth was those victories never seemed to matter. Not to my dad, not to Sarah, not to anyone. In the end, the most painful part wasn't that I was ignored, it was that I started to believe I deserved it. I started to believe that I wasn't worthy of love or attention. I started to believe that if I worked hard enough, maybe I could earn it. But the harder I worked, the further away it felt. And that's when I knew something had to change. And then came the betrayal. The one that broke me completely. It wasn't enough that I was treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. It wasn't enough that every moment I spent trying to prove my worth was met with silence or dismissal. No, the universe seemed determined to remind me just how small I was in the eyes of those I loved. Sarah, who had always been the perfect daughter in my dad's eyes, took it one step further. She decided she wanted something from me that I'd never thought could be taken. My boyfriend. His name was Jack, and he was different from anyone I had ever known. He made me feel seen in a way no one else did. He listened when I spoke, and for the first time I felt valued. I was nervous about introducing him to my family, knowing how they were, but I thought maybe things could be different this time. Maybe I was finally allowed to have something of my own. The night I brought Jack over to meet my family should have been a moment of joy. A milestone in our relationship. Instead, it became the moment I lost everything. At first, everything seemed fine. Jack and I were laughing, talking, sharing stories, and Sarah, as always, was playing her role as the golden child, charming, charismatic, the center of attention. But there was something in her eyes that I didn't understand at first. She was being overly friendly. Her usual flirty self, but there was something darker beneath it. She kept leaning in a little too close, making unnecessary comments about how handsome Jack was. She'd touch his arm, laugh at his jokes, and when she thought I wasn't looking, she'd stare at him in a way that made my skin crawl. I tried to brush it off at first. Maybe I was just being paranoid, right? After all, Sarah had always been the one to joke around with my boyfriends, to tease me in ways that made me uncomfortable. But this felt different. This felt like more than just playful teasing. It felt like a game I wasn't a part of, a game I didn't know I was supposed to be competing in. As the night went on, things got worse. At one point, when I was in the kitchen preparing drinks, I saw Sarah lean in close to Jack, whisper something in his ear, and his smile widened. It was a moment that felt like the world had stopped. My heart dropped into my stomach, and for the first time, I felt completely powerless. I knew then what was happening. It was clear. Jack was giving her attention I thought was mine. But instead of confronting him, I confronted her. I had to. I couldn't stand it anymore. I pulled her aside, my hands shaking, my heart racing. I told her to stop. I told her to stop flirting with my boyfriend. I couldn't believe the words were coming out of my mouth. It felt like betrayal in itself, but I couldn't stand to watch it any longer. I had tried to be patient, I had tried to rationalize it, but it was undeniable now. Sarah, of course, just laughed it off. She looked at me like I was the crazy one. "You're overreacting," she said with that familiar dismissive tone. "You're being paranoid. It's nothing." She shrugged it off like it was a joke, like my feelings didn't matter. She had always known how to turn things around, how to make me feel like I was the one who was wrong, the one who was imagining things. But this time I wasn't imagining anything. I saw the look in Jack's eyes. I felt the tension in the air between them. It was real and I couldn't ignore it. I tried to talk to my dad about it, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he would see it from my side. But when I brought it up, his response shattered me. He sided with Sarah. He told me I was being dramatic, that I was just insecure. I wanted to scream, to tell him how much it hurt, how much I needed him to understand. But instead, I sat there in silence, the words of my dad and sister sinking in, each one heavier than the last. That was the moment it hit me. I wasn't just dealing with the betrayal of a boyfriend. I was dealing with the betrayal of my family. Jack's actions were hurtful, but they weren't nearly as painful as the realization that my own family, my dad, didn't have my back. He chose Sarah over me, just as he always had. And in that moment, I knew I had to let go of them. It wasn't just about losing Jack anymore. It wasn't just about him choosing her over me. It was about realizing that I had never mattered enough to my family for them to see my pain. I had been invisible to them for so long, but this was different. It wasn't just that I was invisible. I was actively pushed aside, replaced. The love and attention I had fought for my whole life were never truly mine to claim. I walked away from that night with a heavy heart, knowing that no matter how much I tried, no matter how hard I fought for their approval, I would always come second. I had loved Jack with all my heart, but now, he was just another reminder of how easy it was for people to take what was mine without a second thought. But the real betrayal, the one that left me feeling broken, wasn't from Jack. It was from the people who should have been my support system, the people who should have cared for me above all else. And that was the moment I realized that the only person I could truly count on was myself. No one else was going to stand up for me. No one else was going to make me feel seen. I had to learn how to survive without them, how to stand on my own 2 feet and face the world without the crutch of family or love that I had always thought would be there. The betrayal that broke me was the one that taught me how to be strong. And from that moment on, I knew that I would never let anyone take my place again. Not Jack, not Sarah, not anyone. I was done being invisible. I thought it was just a one-time thing. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just me being paranoid again. I tried to convince myself that Sarah's behavior was just a little harmless flirtation. She'd always been like that, charming, playful, a little too friendly at times. But deep down, I knew something was off. I had felt it for weeks, a nagging sensation that I couldn't shake. Still, I convinced myself it was nothing, that I was just being insecure. After all, Jack had been with me for months. He was different. He was loyal. I trusted him. But sometimes trust isn't enough. When I woke up the next morning, everything changed. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I didn't hear Jack's usual jokes or Sarah's laughter echoing through the hallway. A cold chill crept through me as I walked through the house looking for them. The house that had always felt like home now felt foreign, as though I didn't belong. I finally reached Sarah's room. I opened the door and there they were, Jack, Sarah, half-dressed, lying beside each other. 2 empty wine bottles on the floor next to them, the corks slightly askew. The sight hit me like a ton of bricks. My heart stopped, then raced at a speed I couldn't control. The room spun, but I couldn't look away. My world shattered in that instant. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or just leave. I stood there for a few moments, frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. How could this be real? How could he do this? How could she do this? They both knew how much Jack meant to me. They knew how hard I had fought for love, for a sense of belonging. But in that moment, none of it mattered. None of it had ever mattered to them. They had both taken everything from me in the most brutal way possible. I chose to scream. I couldn't stay silent. The rawness of my anger and betrayal flooded out of me, and I shouted at them, demanded to know what had happened. My voice broke, but I couldn't stop. I wanted them to feel my pain, to understand the depth of the destruction they had caused. But instead of the guilt, the remorse I expected, I got nothing. From Sarah, I got a shrug. A casual. Almost bored, it wasn't a big deal. My mind couldn't comprehend what was happening. It wasn't a big deal? Was this some sick joke? How could she say that? How could she be so indifferent? So careless with something that meant everything to me? But it wasn't just Sarah. Jack, the person I thought I knew, the person I trusted, the one who had told me he loved me, looked at me with wide, uncomfortable eyes. His face was blank, as if he were trying to make sense of his own actions. He didn't even have the decency to apologize. He didn't try to explain, to tell me it was a mistake. A one-time lapse in judgment. He stood there, speechless, as though it were all somehow my fault. I tried to talk to my dad. I had to. I couldn't keep carrying this alone. I wanted him to see how much this hurt me, how much Sarah had torn my world apart. But when I told him what happened, I expected anger. I expected fury. I expected him to finally realize how much his precious Sarah had destroyed me. Instead, he said, "They're both adults. I can't control what they do." It was a simple, cold statement, but it felt like a dagger to the heart. That was when it all clicked. That was the moment I realized that I would never be enough for my dad. I wasn't just the daughter who caused my mom's death in his eyes, I was now the person who had lost everything. Not just my mom. Not just my childhood. I had lost my boyfriend, my trust, and my sense of worth, all because my sister decided she wanted what was mine. I had always believed that family was supposed to be there for you, no matter what. I had always believed that your parents would protect you, would stand by you when the world crumbled. But in that moment, when I needed him the most, my dad chose to protect Sarah. He chose to look the other way, and that was when I truly understood. To him, I had always been second place, and I would never be anything more. The love I had always fought for was never mine to begin with. My dad had already decided long ago that Sarah was the one who mattered. She was the one who could do no wrong. I was the afterthought, the one who existed only to fill the gaps, to take care of things behind the scenes while they played their perfect little lives. And when it came down to it, when it really mattered, I was nothing. Nothing compared to Sarah. Nothing compared to the perfect family they had built without me. I stood there, feeling the weight of the betrayal crushing me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to destroy everything. But I didn't. Instead, I walked away. Slowly. Quietly. I left them there, in that room together, with nothing more than a broken heart and the overwhelming realization that nothing would ever be the same again. I had never been enough for them. And now I knew I would never be enough for anyone. The love I had given to them, the trust one had placed in Jack, had all been a lie. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly alone. That was it. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. For years, I had bent and twisted myself into shapes I thought my family wanted to see. I had sacrificed who I was in the name of love, acceptance, and approval. I had spent so much of my life trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for me, a mold that was never mine to begin with. But deep down, I knew I was suffocating. I couldn't breathe under the weight of the betrayal, the neglect, the years spent trying to gain affection from people who couldn't, or wouldn't, love me the way I needed to be loved. So I walked away. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't a decision I made lightly. Jack had been my everything for so long. Even though he had betrayed me in the most intimate way, even though I knew I had to let him go, the love I felt for him didn't just vanish overnight. But in the end, I realized that loving him wasn't enough if it meant sacrificing my own sense of self. If it meant allowing someone to treat me like I didn't matter, like my feelings didn't count. I cut off all ties with Sarah. She was the sister I had once adored. The person I had tried so hard to protect, but now she had taken the very last shred of trust one had left. There was nothing left to hold onto with her. I wasn't going to let her be the one who determined my worth anymore. And I didn't look back. The decision wasn't easy. It never is when you've been conditioned to believe that family is everything. But I had spent enough of my life in the shadows, living in the cracks between other people's expectations. I had given everything I had to make everyone else happy, to make sure they never felt neglected, never felt left behind. But in doing so, I had completely neglected myself. I had lost who I was, what I wanted, what made me feel alive. I had to reclaim that. I had to choose me. I couldn't afford to keep living for others anymore. Not when the price had been my own happiness, my own identity. But life has a funny way of testing you. It has a way of showing you just how strong you are by throwing challenges at you when you least expect them. A few years later, my dad fell ill. It was serious. I didn't even recognize the man I had spent so many years resenting. He was no longer the strong figure who had towered over me, whose disapproval had shaped my entire life. He was frail, vulnerable, helpless. The man who had once brushed off my pain, who had turned his back on me in the darkest moments of my life, was now the one in need. It was strange. I felt a pang of guilt when I first heard the news, but then it was quickly overshadowed by something else. Anger. Anger that, after all these years, after everything I had given up, after the way he had treated me, he now expected me to care for him. But something shifted inside me. It wasn't that I forgave him, at least not immediately, but I realized that I still had a small piece of me that wanted the father I had never had. I wanted the man I had imagined in my dreams. The father who would hold me when I was broken, the father who would love me for who I was, not for what he wished I could be. So, despite everything, I stepped up. I paid for his medical bills. I hired a nurse. I did what I had to do, not because I owed him, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could care for someone else without losing myself. I wasn't doing it for him. I was doing it for me. And you know what? For the first time, he apologized. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Regret, yes, but more than that. A recognition of what he had done to me, to our family. It wasn't a grand, sweeping apology, but it was enough. It was enough to make me realize that people are capable of change. Even if it doesn't happen on our timeline. Even if it comes after years of pain. He saw me for who I really was. Not a reminder of his grief. Not the girl who had taken the place of his lost wife. But a person who had carried his weight for years, who had always been there despite everything he had done to me. For a brief moment, I felt the weight of all those years lift off my shoulders. For a brief moment, I felt like I wasn't invisible. Like I mattered. I wasn't the person he had tried to mold me into, but I was the person I had fought so hard to become. But then came my wedding. The moment should have been the culmination of everything I had fought for. A fresh start. A celebration of love. But as I stood at the altar looking around at the people in my life, I realized something. Despite everything I had been through, despite all the betrayal, I wasn't ready to forgive completely. I wasn't ready to let go of the anger, the resentment that still festered deep inside. I wanted to believe that this day was about new beginnings. But part of me knew that it wasn't just about love, it was about proving that I had chosen myself. And in doing that, I realized that the hardest part of this journey wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't the heartbreak. It was learning to let go of the past. To forgive myself for ever thinking I needed anyone to validate my worth. And that's what I did. I chose myself. In every way that mattered. When I started planning my wedding, I knew I wanted my dad to be there. I didn't expect everything to be perfect, but I wanted it to be meaningful. I wanted him to witness the most important moment of my life, the moment I would begin a new journey, the moment I would step into marriage without the shadows of my past. But there was one thing I couldn't do: invite Sarah. She had hurt me in a way that could never heal, in a way I could never forget. Sarah didn't just betray me emotionally, but she trampled on my trust, killing the innocence I once had for her. Even though I tried to understand, tried to forgive, I knew that things between us could never go back to what they were. The wounds she left could never fade from my heart. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay with her, even though I wanted to give her a chance to make things right. The harm Sarah caused was too deep, too cruel. There are scars that time cannot heal, and I realized I couldn't continue living in that false reality. I couldn't invite her to such an important day, knowing she didn't deserve to be a part of my life anymore. However, my dad didn't see it that way. He insisted that I invite Sarah. He said it was time to move on, to heal the family. He even went so far as to say that if I didn't invite her, he wouldn't attend the wedding at all. His words hit me like a hammer. My heart twisted in pain, not because I wanted to please him, but because I realized his lack of understanding. He didn't see that the price I had paid for this family was too great, and I couldn't allow myself to continue being hurt by the decisions they made. For a split second, I thought about giving in. I thought maybe if I invited Sarah, everything would go back to normal. Maybe I would get a part of my family back. Maybe it would be an opportunity to make things right. But then I realized something deeper. If I kept allowing him to manipulate me, if I kept doing what he asked just to preserve relationships that could never be restored, I would never truly be free. I had to face myself and ask what I truly wanted. And the answer was clear. I had to do what was best for me. I asked my grandfather to walk me down the aisle, to be the one to give me away. He was the only one in my family I could trust. The only one who had always stood by me without ever placing conditions. That was my choice. My wedding was going to be about the people who truly loved me, about the people who had been there for me in the tough times, not the ones who had hurt me. And my dad? He didn't show up. At that moment, I didn't feel regret. At that moment, I felt a rush of freedom. I was no longer bound by his expectations, by Sarah's, or anyone else's. I had done what I needed to do. My wedding wasn't a ceremony to satisfy the ego of the family. It was a personal moment, a milestone that confirmed I had made the right decision for myself. This was my day. The day I started a new life with the people who truly cared for me. Not the people who had always made me feel like I wasn't good enough. The feeling was surreal. I had lived for so long in the shadows of others, trying to please them, making them proud. But when I chose myself, I realized that I didn't need to live for anyone's approval. I didn't have to keep sacrificing myself just to please people who had never truly seen me as someone worthy of value. This wedding, though missing my dad's presence, marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I was the one in control. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose how I walk into the future. And in that walk, I would no longer be anyone else's shadow. I would be myself. Looking back, it was the best decision I ever made. My wedding was nothing short of beautiful. My grandfather, the only family member who truly understood me, walked me down the aisle. And for the very first time in my life, I felt what it was like to be loved and supported without condition. It wasn't the family I had once dreamed of, but it was the family I created for myself, one that embraced me for who I truly am, not who they wanted me to be. As for my dad, well, he's still out there, reaching out, trying to guilt me into forgiving him, trying to convince me to reopen old wounds. But I know better now. I've learned that I can't keep giving pieces of myself to people who will never truly see me, people who are only interested in my presence when it suits them. Now, I'm choosing my own happiness. I'm choosing to live for me, to surround myself with those who cherish me, and to stop holding on to relationships that drain my soul. What about you? Do you believe it's possible to truly heal and rebuild after betrayal? Or is forgiveness something that's earned, not given? I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings. Share them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss out on the next chapter. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Until next time, keep choosing yourself. My husband betrayed me, and after we divorced, he caused the tragic death of our daughter in a car accident while his stepdaughter covered up the truth. It's hard to put into words the feeling of betrayal. It's not just about the lies or the broken promises. It's realizing, too late, that you were never truly seen. For many years, I lived under the assumption that my husband loved me, that our life together was built on trust, honesty, and respect. But all of that changed one morning when I found myself standing alone in the hospital, clutching my broken wrist, wondering how everything could have fallen apart so quickly. That morning started like any other. I was simply reaching up to grab a glass from the top shelf, doing nothing unusual, when a sharp pain shot up my arm. My grip slipped and the glass shattered. The pain was immediate and unbearable. I couldn't even move my fingers. Jason, my husband, was lounging on the couch, absorbed in his phone, not even noticing. I could barely say anything. "Jason, I think I sprained my wrist," I said, my voice choking, trying not to show the pain. Without even looking up, he just brushed me off. "Put some ice on it. You'll be fine," he replied indifferently. I didn't argue. This wasn't the first time he had ignored my concerns, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. I wanted to ask him to take me to the hospital, but I knew that would just annoy him. Finally, after some back and forth, he agreed. But instead of showing concern, all I could feel was his frustration. He sighed and drove, tapping his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. I asked him if he could take me to the emergency room, and he sighed again. The drive should have taken only a few minutes. We were just a few minutes away from the hospital. But everything changed when his phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was Laura, his ex-wife. I froze. I didn't know if it was a coincidence or if something deeper was going on. But the shift in his attitude was immediate. Jason's voice softened as he answered the call, the irritation vanishing entirely. My stomach twisted. "Sarah, get out of the car," he said suddenly. I blinked. "What? Are you seriously asking me to get out right now? We're only 2 minutes away from the hospital." His face was cold and indifferent. "I have business to take care of. You can walk." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had been married to this man for 15 years, and now he was telling me to get out of the car over a simple hospital visit. My wrist ached, but I paused, feeling the weight of his indifference. This wasn't just about my wrist, it was everything. I had been living in an illusion, convincing myself that everything was fine. But in that moment, standing on the side of the road, I knew. I wasn't just dealing with a physical injury. I was facing a man who clearly didn't respect me. I stepped out of the car and watched as he drove off without a second glance. The sun felt as though it was pressing down on me. Each step I took like a heavy weight, pulling me further into a pit of frustration and despair. The heat was unbearable, but it wasn't just the scorching weather that drained me. It was the feeling that I was walking through the motions of life with no one to lean on. My wrist throbbed with every step, a dull ache that mirrored the growing pain in my chest. It should have been a simple injury, probably nothing more than a sprain, but the way Jason had dismissed me, it was like that small, insignificant pain was a reflection of everything else he had done to me over the years. I had always been able to convince myself that everything was fine, that our marriage was just going through a rough patch. But today, as I limped my way to the hospital, it became crystal clear. This wasn't just about the pain in my wrist. It was about a man who had stopped caring. It was about being ignored, dismissed, and abandoned by someone I had trusted with my life. The walk felt like a lifetime. My wrist, the only part of my body that seemed to matter in that moment, sent waves of burning pain up my arm with every step. I tried not to let it affect me, to focus on getting to the hospital. But every stride felt like a reminder of how alone I was. How alone I had always been, even when I thought I wasn't. I arrived at the hospital an hour later, drenched in sweat, my legs shaking beneath me. It wasn't just the heat, it was everything: Jason's indifference, my own helplessness. The cold tile of the hospital floor seemed to freeze my heart as I hobbled in. Clutching my wrist, nurses glanced at me, their eyes sharp, but they didn't speak. Just another person to pass through the revolving door of the emergency room. I could almost feel their judgment. Not for my injury, but for the fact that I had come here alone, like no one was waiting for me, no one cared. They asked the usual questions, took my information, and handed me the paperwork to fill out. It all felt mechanical, like I was just another form, another case for them to check off. No warmth, no care. I wanted to scream, to demand someone show me the kindness I had never received from Jason, but I knew it wouldn't matter. It would only make me seem like I was asking for attention, something I had learned to avoid doing years ago. I sat there in the sterile, fluorescent-lit room, staring at my phone. My hand clutched it desperately, hoping for some sign that Jason cared, that he was thinking of me, that he would reach out. Maybe he was just caught up in something, maybe he had simply forgotten. But the screen remained blank. No calls, no messages, nothing. The silence in the waiting room was deafening. The world outside moved on, and I was left in this suffocating bubble of isolation. It wasn't the injury that hurt the most. It was the realization that I was nothing more than an inconvenience to him, a burden. It was a hard pill to swallow. This truth that had been simmering under the surface for years, but had never truly sunk in until now. Jason had driven me to the hospital, if you could even call it that, and then just left me there. He hadn't even bothered to check if I had made it, if I was okay. It wasn't just the neglect in that moment, it was the cumulative years of small, cruel acts of indifference that added up to this monumental feeling of abandonment. I couldn't stop the tears, though they weren't for the injury. No, they were for the pain in my heart. For the realization that my marriage was a lie. Jason had stopped loving me long before this morning, but I had refused to see it. I had closed my eyes to the truth, convincing myself that things would change, that he would come around. But now, sitting there in that cold hospital room, I knew. It was over. The doctor came in after what seemed like an eternity. His voice was clinical, detached, as though he were discussing something trivial. A sprain, a minor fracture, nothing serious. He told me I would need a brace, and to avoid using it for a few weeks. I nodded, but none of it registered. It wasn't the injury that overwhelmed me. It was the emotional collapse that I was too afraid to admit to myself. This wasn't just about a broken wrist. It was about the years of broken trust, of shattered dreams, of a love that had slowly faded until it was nothing but a distant echo in the back of my mind. The brace felt heavy on my wrist, but it was nothing compared to the weight on my heart. Jason wasn't here, and he never would be. Not really. That realization felt like a crushing blow, the kind that leaves you gasping for air. Like the world around you has just tilted off its axis. The physical pain was nothing in comparison. It was a bruise that would heal with time. The emotional scars, however, would take much longer. And as I sat there in the sterile hospital room, I finally allowed myself to face the truth. Jason wasn't coming back, and even if he did, it wouldn't matter. Because in that moment, I realized that I didn't need him. I was stronger than I had ever known. This was the beginning of something new. The end of the life I had built with him. And the start of a new chapter, one where I could finally learn to live for myself. But in that moment, it still hurt. More than I had ever imagined. The pain of rejection. The pain of knowing that no matter how much I had given, it would never be enough. It wasn't just a broken wrist. It was the broken pieces of a life I had tried to hold together for far too long. The days that followed were a blur, a tangled mess of hospital visits and frantic thoughts about what was happening with Jason. My wrist was healing, but my mind, my heart was a mess. I kept replaying everything over and over in my head, his indifference, his neglect, his complete emotional withdrawal. The truth was clear now, but there was still this constant ache inside me. A gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. Something more than just the surface betrayal. But it wasn't until Melanie, my stepdaughter, came to visit that the full weight of the situation really began to sink in. Melanie and I had always shared a close bond. She was like a daughter to me, and I had always tried to be there for her in ways that Jason never was. But when she came to see me that afternoon, there was something different about her. Tension I couldn't place. First, I attributed it to the stress of everything that had been happening. Maybe she was just concerned for me. But as we talked, I noticed a subtle shift in her demeanor. There was something in the way she avoided eye contact, something in the way she was carefully choosing her words. And then, as though she couldn't hold it in any longer, she blurted it out. Jason had been seeing someone else. The words hit me like a slap to the face, but it wasn't entirely a surprise. A part of me had known, had sensed that something was off. The late nights? The secretive behavior, the way he had started to pull away from me emotionally long before the injury. But hearing it from Melanie, the confirmation, it felt like everything inside me shattered in that moment. My chest tightened, my breath caught in my throat, and the room seemed to spin around me. He had been sneaking around behind my back, pretending everything was fine, playing the role of a husband while lying to me for months. All the signs had been there, but I had ignored them. I had convinced myself that things would get better, that he would return to me, to us. But now, the truth was right in front of me, and there was no denying it. What hurt more than the words themselves was the realization that I had been living in a lie for so long. Jason had never even bothered to make an effort. He hadn't even tried to make it seem like he cared. All this time, I had given him everything, but he had been slipping away, choosing to invest his energy into someone else, someone who wasn't me. And when I confronted him about it, I saw the coldness in his eyes. He was indifferent, like he didn't care at all. He told me I was overreacting, that I was making a big deal out of nothing. It was like he couldn't even be bothered to admit what was so plainly in front of him. The hurt, the pain, it didn't matter to him. All that mattered was his own comfort, his own self-preservation. In that moment, I realized just how little I meant to him. It wasn't just the affair. It was everything. The emotional neglect, the broken promises, the years of pretending. And now, after everything, after all the sacrifices I had made for him, for our family, he was just gone. The worst part was how easily he had dismissed me, how easily he had moved on. As though I was just some passing inconvenience in his life. But Melanie wasn't the only one who had seen it. My daughters, Emily and Chloe, had also started to notice. They had sensed the growing distance between Jason and me, the way he had stopped coming home on time, the way he had started making excuses for why he couldn't spend time with them. They saw the change too. They saw their mother being abandoned, not just by Jason, but by someone who had promised to love and protect me. And they didn't know how to process it. As I sat there, I was no longer the woman who stood by him, who supported him, who built a life with him. I was nothing more than a distant memory to him, something he had left behind. And it hurt. More than I could ever put into words. It hurt to realize that everything I had believed in, everything I had built with him, had been a lie. Jason had moved on with Laura. The woman who had always loomed over our relationship like a shadow. She had never truly gone away, had she? She had always been there, lurking in the background, even after their divorce. And now, after all these years, she was the one who had his attention while I was left to pick up the pieces of a broken marriage. He had moved on with her. And I was left to try and figure out how to pick up the shattered remains of my own life. The weight of it all was crushing, and yet, in some twisted way, I felt relief. Relief because, for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to keep pretending. The truth was out. The lies, the deceit, the false promises. They were all laid bare. And now, I could finally begin to see things clearly. The fog that had clouded my judgment for so long was starting to lift, and in its place was a new clarity. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know how I would rebuild my life or what steps I needed to take next. But one thing was for certain. I was done being his fool. I was done pretending that everything was okay. Jason had made his choice, and I had to make mine. It was time for me to stop living in the past and start looking toward the future. The weeks that followed were a blur. A constant cycle of numbness and a creeping sense of dread. Jason had grown even more distant. As though he had already detached himself from everything that we once had. I couldn't even pinpoint when it had happened, but I felt the distance between us widening with each passing day. It was as though he had simply moved on. As if he had turned a page in the story of our lives and was now ready to start a new chapter. And there I was, stuck on the same page, unable to move forward. Unable to escape the echoes of the past. Every conversation we had, every look he gave me reminded me that I wasn't the person he had once loved. I wasn't the woman he had promised to stand by. To protect. That person, she had been replaced. And as much as I tried to convince myself that I could move on too, I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer made sense. It wasn't until one cold, gray morning that everything became clear. I found myself sitting in a lawyer's office, staring at the divorce papers in front of me. The room felt suffocating. The walls closing in. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper too loud in the silence of my thoughts. This was it. This was the moment I had been both dreading and yearning for. The end of the life I had known. The end of a marriage that had slowly withered away beneath the weight of betrayal, indifference, and unspoken resentments. I had spent so many nights in turmoil, wondering if I was making the right choice, if I could somehow salvage what little remained of our relationship. But now as I sat there, signing my name, I realized something that I hadn't fully grasped before. I was free. I was free from the constant heartache. From the suffocating weight of trying to fix something that was never going to be whole again. For the first time in years, I wasn't making a decision based on someone else's happiness or needs. I was making a decision for myself. And that in itself was a feeling I had forgotten. The finality of it hit me all at once, a wave of emotion that left me breathless. It was as if the entire weight of the past few months, maybe even the entire course of our marriage, had been lifted off my shoulders. Jason didn't fight me. He didn't argue or beg me to reconsider. He simply walked away, just like that. He left me with the house, my dignity, and my freedom. But somehow that wasn't enough. Even though the papers were signed, even though the divorce was final, I still felt as though I was trapped in the past. His absence didn't feel like relief, it felt like an empty void. I thought about the years we had spent together, the hopes, the dreams. The promises that had been made and broken. I thought about the woman I had been, the woman who had trusted him with everything, who had believed in us, in our future. That woman felt so far away now, like a ghost in the distance. And though I had gotten everything I thought I wanted, freedom, there was still a deep, gnawing ache inside me. It was the ache of loss, of love unreturned, of time wasted. It was the realization that no matter how hard I tried to move forward, a part of me would always remain tethered to the past, to the version of myself that was intertwined with Jason. In the days after the divorce, there was a strange sense of quiet. The house was empty, not just of Jason, but of the life we had built together. There was no more tension, no more anger. But there was also no peace. I didn't know how to be alone. I didn't know how to live without him, without the life I had once imagined we would have. The silence was deafening. There was no longer any pretense. No more pretending that things were okay. No more hiding from the truth that had been there all along. As the weeks went by, I began to realize that my journey wasn't about moving on from Jason. It was about moving on from the person I had been. The woman who had been so lost in a broken marriage that she had forgotten how to live for herself. I was starting over. Not just with a clean slate, but with a whole new understanding of who I was and what I deserved. But even with that realization, I couldn't help but feel the sting of regret. Regret that I had allowed myself to stay for so long. Regret that I had believed in a man who could never truly love me the way I deserved. Regret that I had sacrificed so much of myself for someone who would never give me the same in return. The divorce wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of something else. Something raw and uncertain. It was the end of one chapter and the start of another. But the process of healing, of rebuilding, was slow. There were days when I couldn't shake the memories, when the weight of everything we had been through felt like it would crush me. But there were also days when I felt a flicker of hope. Days when I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by Jason, by the lies, by the broken promises. For the first time, I was beginning to believe that I could find happiness on my own. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. And I knew it wouldn't come all at once. Healing would take time. Rebuilding would take time. But I was ready. Ready to stop living in the shadows of the past. Ready to start building a future that was mine and mine alone. Then the unthinkable happened. Chloe, my youngest daughter, was gone. Just like that. In the blink of an eye. It felt as though the world had suddenly flipped upside down and I was trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Chloe, the vibrant girl who brought so much joy into our home, the one who made me laugh when everything seemed impossible, was dead. A car accident, they said. And yet, for all the pain that surged through my body, for all the grief that I felt pulling me under, there was a part of me that refused to believe it. It was too sudden, too senseless. It didn't make sense that my sweet daughter, who still had so much life to live, was gone forever. At first, I thought it was just a tragic, random event. An accident. A horrible stroke of fate. How could I have known any better? The police reports were clear. The details were straightforward. It was just another one of those awful things that happen in life. A young girl struck by a car while walking home with friends. The world seemed to stop and I was consumed by the pain of losing her. I clung to the idea that this was just some unfortunate incident. Something beyond anyone's control. But as the days went on, and the fog of grief began to lift, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The questions lingered, slowly gnawing at my mind. Why wasn't Jason at the scene? Why did no one seem to know who had been driving? Why did the situation seem so quiet? No one was asking the right questions. I began to dig deeper. I called Chloe's friends. I asked around the neighborhood. I searched for answers that seemed to slip through my fingers no matter how hard I tried to hold on. And then, the truth began to emerge. Slowly, painfully, the pieces started to fall into place. My heart sank as I realized the truth I had been dreading all along. Jason, my ex-husband, the man I had once loved, the father of my children, had been the one behind the wheel. He had been the one driving the car that had struck my daughter. At first, I couldn't believe it. My brain refused to process the information, refusing to let the truth sink in. Jason, the man who had left me, who had been so cold and indifferent to everything we had shared, the man who had already betrayed me in the worst way imaginable? He was the one who had killed our daughter? It felt like someone had ripped out my heart and stomped on it over and over again. It didn't make sense. Couldn't be true. Jason had always been reckless, always too focused on his own needs to care for anyone else. But this was too much. This was unforgivable. But as the truth sank in, a deep rage began to bubble up inside me. I couldn't just sit back and allow this to happen. Jason thought he could get away with everything, the betrayal, the lies, and now, the death of our daughter. But I wasn't going to let him. Not this time. He had already taken so much from me. My trust, my dignity, my marriage. But he was not going to get away with Chloe's death. I would make sure of it. I found out that Melanie, my stepdaughter, had known all along. She had known that Jason had been the one driving that night, and she had kept quiet. She was scared. Terrified of what Jason would do to her if she spoke out, terrified that he would hurt her, too, if she told the truth. I understood her fear, but it didn't matter anymore. Chloe was gone. And I needed to make sure Jason paid for what he had done. The guilt and shame that Melanie carried with her was palpable, but I couldn't let that stop me. Chloe was my daughter. My responsibility. Jason had destroyed our family, and now he had taken Chloe from me. I had to make sure that someone held him accountable for his actions. No one else was going to do it. The police had their reports, but the case had already been swept under the rug. Jason was too well connected, too much of a smooth talker, to let this be the end of it. But I couldn't stand by and watch him get away with murder. Not this time. I gathered the courage to speak out, to demand justice, even though it felt like my insides were crumbling with every word I spoke. I contacted the authorities, told them everything I knew, everything I had uncovered. I couldn't rest until Jason was held responsible for what he had done. I couldn't let my daughter's death be just another statistic. Another tragic story buried in the background. The legal system was slow, frustrating, and painful to navigate, but I wasn't going to back down. Jason thought he could bury this, just like he had buried everything else. But he was wrong. This time, I would make sure he paid for his crimes. He would have to face the consequences of his actions, whether he liked it or not. As I fought for justice, I felt a strange sense of determination settle within me. For all the pain I was feeling, for all the heartbreak and rage, I knew I couldn't let Chloe's death be in vain. I couldn't let Jason walk away without facing what he had done. Not when I had lost everything. Not when my daughter's life had been taken so senselessly, so violently. I would make sure the truth came out no matter how hard it was. Jason would not get away with this. Not on my watch. The story didn't end with the shocking truth about Chloe's death. Nor with the punishment I had imagined. In fact, everything I had believed to be the conclusion was merely the beginning of something much darker. The truth, as it always does, twisted and turned in unexpected ways, revealing new horrors I had never anticipated. I couldn't just sit still and watch life pass by, especially when I realized the heartbreaking truth. Melanie, my stepdaughter, the one person I had trusted, had helped conceal the facts. And Jason, my ex-husband, was still finding ways to avoid responsibility, just like he always had. The weight of this new revelation crushed me in ways I hadn't prepared for. Melanie, the daughter I had helped raise, the girl I had treated as my own, was not the innocent victim I had assumed. She was complicit. She had known, and instead of doing the right thing, she stayed silent. The guilt that had festered inside her for weeks was something I couldn't overlook, and it gnawed at me, pulling at the very fabric of what I thought our family was. It was like everything had been a lie. When I confronted Melanie about that night, about everything she knew, the walls she had carefully built around herself came crashing down. She cried, sobbed in a way that felt almost like an apology, but not quite. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the hurt, the shame, but it didn't change the fact that she had kept quiet. She had let Chloe's death be buried under the weight of fear and loyalty to a man who didn't deserve it. Jason had been her father for years, but he was nothing more than a man who manipulated her into silence, using his power over her as a weapon. Melanie explained everything. Her voice was shaky, each word coming out as if it were torn from her. Jason called me that night, she said, her voice cracking. He said he wanted to talk to me. I didn't think much of it. But then he took me for a walk. And then we saw Chloe, Mom. I froze. The room around me seemed to close in as her words hung in the air. The weight of the truth settled on me like a ton of bricks. She had witnessed the accident, the moment when Chloe's life was taken, but she had stayed silent. She had known what happened, and yet she chose not to speak up. I stared at Melanie, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath caught in my throat. She didn't stop, did she? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. My eyes were locked on her, searching for some sign that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But deep down I already knew the answer. Melanie nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes as she choked on the words that followed. He was afraid that if we called the police, he'd lose everything. I was scared, Mom. If I spoke out, he would abandon me. We didn't know what to do. Her voice was small, barely above a whisper, but it was enough to shatter what little was left of my trust in her. A sense of discomfort surged inside me. A feeling I couldn't shake, no matter how much I wanted to. The betrayal ran deeper than I had ever imagined. Jason had always been selfish, always too consumed with his own desires to care about anyone else. But this was something new. He hadn't just lied. He had taken a life. And Melanie had known. She had helped cover it up. Out of fear, out of loyalty to a man who had never treated her like family but had manipulated her into silence. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any hurt he had ever caused me. Jason thought he could escape it all. He thought he could control the narrative as he always had, manipulate everyone around him to protect himself. He had done it for years, lying, cheating, hiding behind his charm, his smooth words. But this time he had gone too far. This wasn't just about lies. This was about a life being taken, about my daughter's future being stolen from her. And I wasn't going to let him walk away from this. Not without facing the consequences of his actions. Not without paying for what he had done. As much as I understood Melanie's fear, as much as I could empathize with the pressure she had been under, I couldn't let her silence be justified. Chloe was gone. My daughter. The daughter I had raised, loved, and protected. And no matter how much pain I felt from her betrayal, I knew I had to stand up for Chloe. I couldn't let her death be swept under the rug. Melanie's guilt was palpable, but so was her fear. It had consumed her, but it was now my turn to be the strong one. I had to face the truth head-on, no matter how ugly it was. Jason was not going to get away with this. He had always thought that his lies and his power could protect him, but this time it was different. I wasn't going to let it slide. I wasn't going to let Chloe's death become just another unsolved tragedy, another quiet, forgotten moment in time. Not while I was still breathing. I would make sure he faced justice. And if it meant fighting against the very person I had once trusted, Melanie, then so be it. I couldn't let this remain hidden, not when the truth was so raw, so undeniable. It had been hidden for too long, buried beneath lies and manipulation, but now it was time to bring it to light. Jason thought he could continue living in the false light of innocence, pretending nothing had happened, that he was the victim in all of this. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not anymore. The fury inside me began to burn hotter with every passing day. The realization that my daughter had been killed, not by accident but by the recklessness of the very man I had once trusted, was something I couldn't let go. I had spent years pretending everything was fine, making excuses for him, allowing him to manipulate the narrative to fit his needs. But not this time. Not when it came to Chloe. I contacted the police, reached out with everything I had. I couldn't let fear hold me back anymore. Not fear of Jason, not fear of the consequences. He had already taken so much from us. And now I was going to take control. I gave the officers every shred of evidence I could gather, every detail about that night. The lies he had told. The way he had tried to cover up the truth. It was all in front of me, and I was done being quiet. A mother's love knows no bounds. I had protected my children for years, but this was different. I was going to do whatever it took to ensure that justice was served for Chloe, even if it meant facing the man who had once been my partner, the man who had shattered everything I believed in. The police conducted a thorough investigation, digging deeper than I had ever imagined they would. At first, I had no faith that the system would work. Jason was too slick, too good at playing the role of the innocent victim, and the thought of him getting away with murder again haunted me. But then, the pieces began to fit together. The officers found not only that Jason had been behind the wheel that night, but they also uncovered signs of reckless driving. There were skid marks, a trail of carelessness that had been ignored, signs that Jason hadn't been as careful as he should have been. Chloe's death wasn't just some tragic accident. It wasn't a fluke of fate. It was the result of Jason's reckless disregard for everyone around him. His utter disregard for the consequences of his actions. And as the truth unfolded, as the investigation pieced together the story of that night, I couldn't help but feel a rush of anger, a rush of betrayal. Jason had taken Chloe's life with his selfishness, but he had also taken a piece of me with him. I couldn't just let it slip away into the past, forgotten, ignored. Chloe's death deserved more than that. The hardest part was yet to come. Melanie, my stepdaughter, the one person I thought I could trust, had known the truth all along. She had known what had happened. But she had stayed silent. And even though she had her reasons, fear, guilt, the manipulation of a man who had raised her, her silence weighed on me like 1,000 pounds. I had loved her like my own. She was my daughter in every sense that mattered. But she had betrayed me just as Jason had. But as the investigation continued, Melanie began to see the truth. The guilt that had plagued her for so long was too much to bear. She could no longer stand by Jason, no longer protect him, even if he had tried to manipulate her into believing she owed him her loyalty. The weight of what she had helped cover up was too much for her to ignore, and she finally cracked. She cooperated with the police, providing them with the details of that night that Jason had tried to bury. Every piece of information she gave, every truth she revealed, was another step toward the justice we all needed, even though it didn't feel like enough. I couldn't help but feel torn. My love for Melanie, the girl who had been like a daughter to me, was still there, but it had been cracked. The trust we once shared was gone. I could never forget what she had done, what she had chosen to keep hidden, even when she knew the cost. But at the same time, I couldn't deny the remorse I saw in her eyes, the weight of the decision she had made to finally speak up. She had made a choice to help me, to help Chloe. And though that didn't erase the past, it was a step toward the truth. All I needed now was justice. Chloe's life deserved to be acknowledged. Her death needed to mean something. Even if it was just to make sure Jason paid for what he had done. He couldn't keep hiding behind lies and manipulation. He couldn't keep thinking that he could escape the consequences of his actions. I wasn't going to let him. The battle ahead would be long and exhausting, filled with obstacles, but I wasn't going to stop. The system wasn't perfect, but it was the only way. Jason would have to face the consequences. No more hiding, no more pretending. This time I would fight for Chloe, for the truth, and I would make sure Jason paid for what he had done. A month passed, and the news came. Jason had been arrested. The charges, manslaughter and unlawful conduct, felt like both a victory and a weight. The notification from the police arrived in my hands. And for a split second, a sense of relief washed over me. He was being held accountable for the death of my daughter. for the reckless act that had stolen her future, her laughter, her life. But as the relief settled in, it was quickly overtaken by the suffocating grief that had been lingering in the background all along. Chloe would never come back, no matter what Jason faced. No matter how long he was locked away, it wouldn't bring her back to me. That was the truth that I couldn't escape. No amount of justice could fill the hole in my heart, the emptiness where her presence once was. But still, there was something, a glimmer of satisfaction, however small. At least we had gotten justice for her. At least I had done everything in my power to make sure her life wasn't forgotten, that it meant something. The truth had been uncovered and Jason was finally facing the consequences of his actions. That at least was something I could hold on to. The day I stood in front of Chloe's grave was the hardest moment of my life. It felt as though the weight of the world was pressing down on me, and I couldn't breathe. But in the midst of the overwhelming sadness, there was a strange kind of peace that settled over me. It wasn't the kind of peace I had expected, the kind where everything is okay, and the pain vanishes. No, this peace was different. It was a quiet acceptance, the understanding that I had done all I could. I had fought for my daughter, for the truth and for justice. I had confronted the wrongs and I had uncovered the secrets that had been buried for far too long. I had protected my family the best I could, and now, the pieces were finally falling into place. As I stood there, alone with my thoughts, I could feel the weight of everything we had endured. The lies, the betrayal, the pain of losing Chloe. It all rushed at me in a flood. And yet, there was a flicker of something else. I wasn't consumed by rage anymore. I wasn't drowning in sorrow. The anger and heartbreak were still there, lingering beneath the surface, but they no longer controlled me. They no longer had the power to define me. I had found a kind of peace, one I never thought was possible. It wasn't a perfect peace, and it didn't erase the grief, but it was enough to allow me to breathe again, to feel like I could move forward even if it was one slow step at a time. I no longer had to live under the shadow of Jason and his lies. I no longer had to constantly question myself or my decisions. I had done what I needed to do. I had fought for what was right. Melanie had started a new life too. I had seen her go through the same turmoil that I had, carrying the burden of guilt, wondering if there was a way to fix the damage she had helped cause. But just like me, she had come out the other side. The weight of her actions, the silence she had carried for so long, had been lifted. She had finally found a way to make peace with herself, and I could see it in her eyes. She was free of the guilt that had weighed so heavily on her. And though it didn't undo the damage, it allowed her to begin again. For the first time in a long time, I no longer carried the guilt either. I had done everything I could to protect my family, and I had made the right decisions no matter how hard they were. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't bring Chloe back, but I could ensure that justice had been served and that the truth was out. I had fought for her, and in some ways I had won. Though Chloe was gone, I still had my family. My children, the ones who had stood by me through it all, were still here. They still loved me, and I loved them more than anything. I had my children and my friends. The people who had never left my side, who had supported me when I had nothing left to give. And in that I found a sense of comfort. I wasn't alone. I wasn't broken beyond repair. Yes, I had lost Chloe, but I still had the love of those who remained. Life was never going to be the same. The void left by Chloe's absence could never be filled, and I didn't want it to be. She would always be a part of me, a part of us, and nothing could take that away. But I had learned something through all of this, through all the heartbreak and betrayal, that there is strength in the struggle. There is peace in the acceptance of what you cannot change. And there is healing in the love you still have left. And as I walked away from Chloe's grave that day, a bittersweet calm washed over me. I wasn't healed. I wasn't whole. But I was ready to face whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, I was ready to live again, to keep moving forward, even if it was just one step at a time. After all the pain, after every tear shed, and every wound that had taken its toll, I found myself beginning to rediscover who I was. It was like peeling back layers that I had buried for years, layers of self-doubt, guilt, and pain. I had spent so long being defined by what Jason had done to me, by the shattered pieces of my past that I could never seem to put together. But now, I was learning that I was more than just the woman who had been hurt. I was more than the victim of betrayal. I started with small steps. I began walking every morning, feeling the cool air against my skin and letting the rhythm of my footsteps clear my mind. At first, it felt foreign, like I was going through the motions, but with each step, I felt a little lighter, a little freer. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking with the weight of someone else's mistakes on my shoulders. I wasn't walking with the burden of guilt or shame that had clouded my every decision before. It was just me, the path in front of me, and the sound of my breath. As I walked, I found myself thinking about the things I had never given myself the chance to do. For so long, I had put everyone else's needs before my own, thinking that if I just kept giving, I would find happiness. But the truth was, I had neglected myself. I had forgotten who I was outside of being Jason's wife, outside of being a mother who was constantly trying to fix things, trying to make everyone else happy. Now I was starting to remember. I was starting to feel the flicker of things I used to love before life had gotten so complicated. I joined art classes, something I had always wanted to do but never allowed myself to pursue. At first, it felt strange putting brush to canvas, making strokes without any expectations. But as I painted, I could feel the creativity flowing through me like a river that had been dammed for too long. It was freeing. I realized that I wasn't just painting pictures, I was painting my own sense of freedom, my own sense of identity. Each brushstroke was a release of the old self, a letting go of the parts of me that had been held back by fear and doubt. I explored hobbies I never thought I could have. I joined a local community group, something simple but new for me. I learned to cook dishes that weren't just for the sake of feeding others. For once, I was cooking for me, creating something that brought me joy, something that nourished my soul. Each day, I found new pieces of myself, pieces that had been buried under years of neglect and sacrifice. Pieces that I had forgotten were there. I was no longer the woman from my past. I wasn't the wife who endured betrayal, the woman who had been manipulated and hurt. I wasn't the mother who carried the weight of other people's mistakes, constantly feeling responsible for things that weren't mine to fix. I had shed all of that. Slowly, I began to realize that the woman who had survived it all, the hurt, the lies, the loss, was stronger than I had ever given her credit for. I had learned to love myself, and it was the kind of love that didn't need validation from anyone else. It was the love that came from within, the love that said, "You are enough." With each passing day, I felt stronger. I felt like I was reclaiming the parts of me that had been stolen or hidden away. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect to be, but I was finally learning to live for myself. I was finally free of the shadows that had once consumed me. Melanie, too, had started a new life. She had her own journey to follow, but I could see it in her eyes. The guilt, the weight of her past actions had been lifted. She no longer carried the burden of her silence. She had made peace with herself, just as I was making peace with myself. We had both found a way to move on, to rebuild our lives, though the scars would always remain. We had to learn to live with them, but they didn't define us anymore. I found myself surrounded by my daughters, the people who had never stopped loving me, never stopped supporting me. We had all rebuilt our lives in our own way. We started each day with a sense of relief, with the understanding that the past was behind us. No more secrets. No more lies. We could breathe freely again. A new chapter had begun. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to move forward. Not just because I had to, but because I wanted to. I was no longer afraid of the unknown. I no longer feared the future. The things I couldn't control. I had spent so long feeling helpless, but now I understood that I had the power to create my own happiness, to make my own decisions. As I looked at the life I had built after everything, I felt a sense of pride. I wasn't the same person I had been when everything started. I had grown, I had healed, and most importantly, I had found my strength. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was no longer walking it with fear in my heart. I was walking it with hope, with a sense of possibility, and with a renewed belief in myself. This story is a journey through betrayal, grief, and ultimately the hard-won freedom that comes with facing the truth. Sarah's loss was unimaginable. But in the midst of it all, she fought to reclaim her freedom and to secure justice for her daughter. The trials she endured couldn't erase the pain or the scars, but through it all, she found peace, a peace that was hard-earned but transformative. Now, I want to hear from you. How did Sarah's journey resonate with you? What did her fight for justice and healing make you think about your own life? Drop a comment below with your thoughts or reflections. If you felt moved by her story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next chapter in this emotional journey. Together, let's keep exploring the power of resilience and the strength that comes from within.